Hello, this is the fifth and latest part of Claws of a Lion by Neon Sangetsu. Link will be in the description. All author's notes have been removed between chapters. Also, any explicit NSFW scene will be removed. This part will cover chapter 41 to 48. This is a trick. Lord Darklin overreaches himself. He has already taken the king and now he seeks my son as well? No, he will not have him. But my lord, if you would consider, he shall not have him. Tilda Tywin Lannister. Know the game. Interlude. God save him from fools. In this moment, Tywin Lannister wanted nothing more than to strangle said noble fools, yet alas, he couldn't do that. Well, perhaps he could, but he shouldn't, no matter how gratifying or satisfying the end result might be. Storming down the hall leading away from the small council chamber, he closed his ears to chaos behind him, and the small-minded fools with it. Braggarts and buffoons, one and all. He should have them hanged. They'd been so close, well on their way to solidifying the grasp of the Lannister name in King's Landing, and with it, Westeros as a whole. Already the small council itself was mostly theirs. Connington killed, Chelstead dead, Varys and Pycelle already on their side, with Merryweather and Sir Gerald the sole remaining holdouts. His son named Master of Coin, Rhaella smitten with him, and a newly hatched dragon to her name, all while their beasts remained hidden beneath Casterly Rock. It was all coming together until it all fell apart with a single message. My lord's a rider from Duskendale. He comes bearing a message. Lord Darklin wishes to treat with Nathaniel Lannister. Said messenger had thrown everything into chaos. The very idea of his son meeting with the Darklins should have been tossed out the moment it wasn't. But of course, it wasn't. Sir Gerald and Merryweather were all for it. Their lives weren't on the line, while he stood adamantly opposed. Worse, Nate seemed somewhat inclined to actually make the attempt. Rhaella, meanwhile, had vehemently disagreed, nearly giving herself away in the process. In the end, no one had been able to agree on anything. He declared the meeting done, sent everyone to their chambers, then stormed out himself. What in the seven hells were the Darklins up to now? For once he didn't know. The Dennis Darklin he knew from his youth was no fool. Bold and brash at times, perhaps. Yet the man wasn't stupid. Ambitious, yes, but not stupid. Which was precisely why his actions of late made so little sense. Seizing Aerys had been a singular act of monumental stupidity on his part, one that would likely lead to the end of Duskendale and the Darklin line alike. Come to think of it, didn't the Darklins possess an ancestral Valyrian steel sword of their own? Sunset, he believed the name was. Fitting, given they were facing the sunset of their house. The defiance of Duskendale, some were already calling it. He'd recently caught a bard singing such in the halls with some rather disparaging lines to the sanity and virility of the Targaryens. Besides, Aerys would have plucked out his tongue. Tywin had the man whipped for his foolishness, gave him some coin for his bravery and sent him to the Spider. Varys would make good use of him in the future, and moreover now the eunuch would owe him a debt. It was the smart thing to do. If only the rest of this bloody world ran on logic. Honestly, if he were to kidnap the king, he wouldn't be nearly so idiotic about it. One could not simply manhandle a monarch, as Darklin did, without crushing consequences. Taking Aerys would cripple King's Landing for a time, yes, but it would also embolden Rhaegar to make his move and stake his claim as heir. Once entrenched, the son would be far more difficult to remove than his foolish father, due in no small part to the small folks' love of him. Better to keep his mad and ailing father on the Iron Throne a while longer, knowing he would make mistakes and unwittingly weaken the Targaryen name in his stupidity. But in the same vein, they couldn't afford to have Aerys on the throne much longer, because the man might actually attack them at this rate. Perhaps he'd do them all a favour and say Rhaegar was a bastard, unlikely but a man could dream. No, his was a delicate balance to walk, a line between loyalty and sanity, carefully towing said line, dancing on a dagger's edge, making sure never to fall one way or the other. Truth be told, he was growing weary of this damnable dance. Every moment spent here reminded him why he'd forsaken the capital in the first place. All the power in the world simply hadn't been worth tolerating the madness and sheer stupidity of Aerys and Rhaegar. Really, the only sane thing to do was kill father and son both, then wed Rhaella to Nathaniel. For the safety and security of the realm, of course, no matter what some might say. And if the family name just so happened to benefit from this, well, so be it. A happy coincidence. He knew he was making excuses. A decision had to be made, and soon, before Gerald and Merryweather tried to wrest the small council out from under him. The Darklings had overreached themselves. He might be the only one to see it, but they had. This was a trap. They will not have my son. I will not allow it. I refuse. Truth be told, a small part of him was tempted to let Nathaniel at them, but that would inevitably end with Eris being freed. And so they circled back to the matter at hand. The father? Or the son? They needed to get that siege up, and soon. He passed Sandor in the hall, headed the other way on some errand or another, and gestured to him with a curt nod. Clegane, with me. The hound pivoted and followed him with nary a grunt. Good man, Clegane. Not nearly so dour since his face was healed, but all the more loyal for it. Trustworthy too, unlike his brute bit of a brother. He could count on him to follow orders and speak his mind when needed. He wasn't an idiot. There was a keen mind lurking under that heavy brow of his. They walked together in stoic silence for some time, him ahead and Clegane behind, before the latter finally spoke. Seems to me the Darklands days are done. Tywin clasped both hands behind his back and kept walking. They are. We'll be killing them all, then, he scoffed. Of that much you can be certain. There at least was one certainty he could cling to. One way or another, Dennis Darklyn would die. Be it in a siege, a torturer's table, or perhaps even a duel, the man's fate, and that of his house, was already sealed. If they continued this foolish resistance, there would be no survivors. The rest of the realm already knew it, and he suspected some members of House Darklyn were beginning to as well. Why else send out a rider? Good. Clegane grunted. Been getting rusty these last few years. Need to keep the sword sharp. Tywin kept his gaze and his focus fixed firmly forward. You'll have your fill, Clegane. I can promise you that. A thought occurred to him, more of a whim, really, and for once he acted on it. When the time comes, secure sunset. House Lannister could use another Valyrian steel blade. Thinking ahead, are we? The siege isn't even up yet. Here at last, Tywin paused to look back at his sword. Have you ever known me to lose a war, Clegane? Wasn't what I meant, the man muttered, glancing away. Just saying it's best not to count your chickens before they hatch. He could see the wisdom in that, loath though he was to admit it. Your boy's a butcher, Clegane continued, mistaking his silence for acceptance. He'll deal with them, one way or another. Tywin heaved a world-weary sigh and began walking again, forcing the hound to follow. That's what concerns me. Nate was good at winning allies to their cause, but enemies? He only ever dealt with their enemies one way. Euron Greyjoy had been the exception, not the rule. If they loosed Nathaniel amongst the Darklings under the pretense of peace talks, he had no doubt what would happen. A hellish bloodbath. In short order, they cleared the hallways and reached the throne room. For once, it was devoid of life, nary a soul to be seen. No, wait, he told a lie. Noise on his flank drew Tywin's eye, then his ire. Ah, there you are. A jovial voice cried out, clamouring for his attention. I was just about to send out a search party. Prince Rhaegar was sitting upon the Iron Throne, lounging in as though it were already his. God save him from fools. The hound scoffed and muttered a curse beneath his breath while he could, before they drew within earshot of the pompous prince. Tywin had no such luxury. Sighed and forced a smile to his face, hiding his scowl in the shadows of his heart as they approached the throne. Your Grace. Rhaegar beamed back at him, looked down on him, wholly at his ease. How fares my small council? It is not yours, pompous child. You have done nothing to earn it. He mustn't say that aloud, of course. He'd already come from a contentious council meeting and had no desire for another, least of all from this fool. Perhaps it was droll of him, rude even. But he made his opening gambit before this Targaryen twit could. I understand you struck my son. Rhaegar bristled with shame, his smile fading somewhat, but didn't deny it. Nay, I did. Tywin kept his hands clasped behind his back and tilted his head a fraction of an inch to the right. May I ask why? Rhaegar slunk into the Iron Throne, idly picking at his fingernails. He humiliated me. Of that, he had no doubt. Nathaniel was not a man of half measures. That said, you requested the duel, did you not? The prince's face reddened with shame, and he twisted the proverbial blade a tad more. Furthermore, you attacked him with his back turned. That will tarnish your reputation. Rhaegar winced anew. That was not my intent at the time. Of course not, because he never thought things through. Nathaniel had done well to lay him low in such a matter and inform him after the fact. Whispers would creep back to the people of King's Landing. In time, they would come to realise their perfect prince wasn't so perfect after all. Already his royal reputation had begun to founder, and he scarcely realised it. But if it was a war of words he wanted, so be it. Then it is well that you learned this lesson with blunted blades rather than live steel. Rhaegar seethed like the child he was at heart. Tywin imagined drawing his dagger and ramming it through that heart. Watching him die would bring him more relief than 1,000 dying dragons. He let the moment pass. What is the decision on the Darklings, then? Rhaegar changed tact suddenly, surprising him. Will we take the fight to them or negotiate? Insolent pup. Tywin's jaw tightened. You needn't concern yourself with such things. I have the matter well in hand. The prince pressed his advantage. Can I not be counselled on such things? No, my prince, you cannot, because you are a craven and a fool. With that, the last thin thread of Tywin's patience snapped. In all fairness, he wasn't sure when he began moving, only that he did. Between one blink and another, he found himself striding up the steps to the Iron Throne, taking them slowly one at a time until he stood towering over the prince where he sat. Rhaegar shrunk back into the chair, trying to get away from his cold gaze, but there was nowhere for him to run, nor could he forsake the throne and stand himself without looking like a fool. You are being counselled at this very moment, Tywin intoned. Perhaps you should take heed. Rhaegar rumbled something that sounded like a whimper deep within his throat. Then, before he could get the last word in, Tywin looked to the hound, catching Clegane's eye over his shoulder. Clegane. The prince is tired. Rhaegar bristled, somewhat put out, but unable to muster true fury in the face of his glare as the hound climbed the steps to stand beside him. I'm not tired. Yes, you are. Tywin laid a firm hand on his shoulder and tried for a reassuring expression. You clearly overexerted yourself during your duel. You need rest. Sharpen your sword and prepare yourself. We will need you in the coming days. The prince faltered and stood, looking away as he let Clegane guide him down the steps. Yes, of course, you're right. I should rest. Perhaps I'll pay a visit to Mother. Tywin granted him a grim nod, allowing him to leave. I am sure she would be glad of your company, Your Grace. A lie, of course. If he had it his way, Rhaegar would soon die in the battles to come. The realm would mourn him, of course, but accidents happened. Such a pity. Long live the king. Chapter 42. You cannot go. It would be the best course of action. I forbid it. I still have to. No, I am your queen. I forbid it. Do you seriously think you can stop me? Such cheek. Why must you be so infernally stubborn? Tilda. Taming the dragon Naruto didn't consider himself much of a schemer. There it was. The bitter truth out in the open, laid bare for all to see. Yes, he could make proper plans when pressed, even good ones in a pinch, yet his true talents lay elsewhere these days. Mostly in the realm of talking, fucking, and killing. He'd grown rather adept at that last one, hadn't he? Frightfully so. Sometimes he could have sworn he saw the blood dripping on his hands out the corner of his eyes, still stained scarlet despite them being long clean. A small price to pay. If that was to be his sin, his curse, then so be it. Such was his burden to bear. There was no use denying his deeds, nor did he. He'd become a cruel composer in the ancient art of murder, some would say. A symphony of death and destruction. A maestro of mayhem. That was him. Where he walked, death followed. The Greyjoys would certainly agree, if their bloated bodies could speak. So many screams, so many lives, so many drowned. And he would kill a great many more in the days to come. It didn't bother him, not after his talk with Tywin. He knew it should, but it didn't. Death was something to be mourned. Certainly, but he'd gradually grown numb to it. How the old him would have wept to see him now. But now? Now he felt his mind begin to wander as he meandered away from the small council chamber. He had long since closed both his ears and heart to the clamour he'd left behind there. Tywin father had the right of it, storming out before him like he did. Simpering fools, the lot of them. It was so very easy to crush one's enemies rather than talk them down and around, wasn't it? Almost disturbingly so. Honestly, he wouldn't have tried to supplant Aerys and Rhaegar at all if Rhaella wasn't involved. Were it not for her, he might have simply culled the Targaryens as Tywin first suggested, and been done with it. Let the nobles sort themselves out, you know. But he was the one to write to her. He was the one to initiate first contact, and he was the one to fall in love with that wonderful woman in the first place. Wife, he reminded himself, risking a rueful glance at his ring finger and the glistening gem therein. They might not be married by the convoluted laws of Westeros piss on that, as a certain Baratheon would say, but by all the rules of the elemental nations, they most assuredly were wed. Hells, shinobi weddings technically didn't require a priest during wartime, which they most assuredly were. The thought brought a bit of a spring back to his step as he traversed the corridors, and while he didn't shout the walls had ears after all, he allowed himself a moment of rare vindictive glee as he basked in the afterglow of his triumph. I have a wife? Ah, get cuckolded, heiress. She's mine now. I ain't giving her back. Elia, Lyanna and Cersei. Most definitely Cersei might certainly have something to say about that once he got back, as would Nymeria. But he'd made his choice. Try as he might, he couldn't let the Queen go, just as she couldn't him. The dice was cast, his decision made, his destiny set in stone. Not by fate or some higher power, but his own hand. Nor could he afford to slow down. Couldn't stop yet. Wouldn't. He had miles to go and promises to keep. Gods, but there was much to do, and so little time in which to do it. If there was one thing he missed about his last life, one simple little thing, it would be the naivete. How simple everything was. Or seemed, at least. He knew better now. At a glance, the Hidden Leaf village might have seemed peaceful on the surface, and perhaps it was for some. But there had been scheming in the shadows he'd failed to notice, things he'd later turned a blind eye to. When you lived in the light, it was so very difficult to see the shadows. And to think he'd once wanted to be Hokage, the very name meant fire shadow, almost made him laugh. No, wait, it actually did. For all their precious pomp and prestige, Westeros simply couldn't hold a candle to the hidden villages and their backstabbing, to say nothing of their 4 great shinobi wars. There was a reason it had been so difficult to get sea mates the 5 great villages work together against Obito and Madara by the end. No one trusted each other. Shinobi were a paranoid bunch. Rightfully so. When you had folks that could move at light speed, summon monsters, sling jutsu that annihilated you at the cellular level, strangle you with shadows, or ensnare your mind just by looking you in the eye, paranoia wasn't just a necessity, but a guarantee. So no, Westeros, for all its magic, had nothing on his people. What they did have, however, were dragons. Gorgeous creatures though they were, especially given his deer-tailed beast friends were reincarnating as them, they weren't invincible. Until they were fully grown, he'd keep them under wraps. Chome was the sole exception to that rule. There was no hiding him now. Sadly, that didn't make the scheming and backbiting to acquire him any less annoying, which brought him full circle to the matter at hand. More of this pointless politicking. Gods, how he hated playing this infernal Game of Thrones. He could play, mind you, and play it well, but damn if he didn't disdain it. His silver tongue could only carry him so far in this world. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Words equated action. Action leads aggression. Aggression becomes battle. Better to speak softly and carry a big stick. Or was it walk softly and carry a big stick? One of the two, surely. At present, he found himself rather tempted to use said stick right about now, given the situation. Preferably beat someone to death with it. Now that Darklyn's knew Rhaella had a dragon, they naturally wanted to discuss terms. They must have found out somehow. Maybe Varys had let them learn about it, the better to strike fear in their hearts. Why else would they send a messenger making such an oblique statement, and really asking to meet him? Did they think themselves clever? He'd agreed, naturally, if only to turn the Darklyn's sordid schemes on their head. Not that his declaration had done much, mind you. Rhaella had been left livid by his decision, to say nothing of Tywin himself. Even now their angry denunciations thundered in his ears. Absolutely not! You're endangering yourself! Do you have any idea how important you are? Such harsh words they'd flung at one another, Rhaella especially. Her caution was warranted, but ultimately unnecessary. She knew what he could do, yes, but not what he was capable of. Only the Bijou truly knew that, and they were hiding under Casterly Rock. There was a difference between knowing and seeing. They knew what he had wrought. He'd handed them their hides during the war before he'd fully come into his full might. Yes, he might not possess the same godly cosmic level power at the moment, but that didn't make him any less dangerous. If Dennis Darklin thought he was just a man, he was in for a rude awakening. Now he was about to do it again to another enemy, this time for keeps. A Lannister pays his debts. And but the House of Darklin had certainly wrought one, hadn't they? Not just against him, but the entire realm. They had no way of settling that debt in treaties or resources, wheat, or even gold. No, they would be paying the blood price, with all their lives as collateral. There was a doomed struggle. Anyone could see that. It was only a matter of time. Yet still they persisted in this foolishness, as though they had a plan. And now they wanted to meet with him? Preposterous! The thought made him hum and thumb his chin, if only to keep a small, hysterical laugh from bubbling past his lips. How many more do I have to kill before they get the message? Hundreds? Thousands? Millions? Ain't there even that many people in this world? And what then? What if Essos got uppity? Would he cross the narrow sea and become a butcher there as well? His right arm trembled for a moment, not from fear, but anger. He grasped it by the wrist until the tremors abated and the limbs stilled. He was so very tired of killing, but he couldn't start sparing his enemies now, could he? Granted, it had worked in the case of Nymeria, and Cersei to a lesser extent. But they were the outliers. The exception's not the rule. He didn't consider Euron an ally, nor did he fully trust him, nor would he ever. Who knew what that madman might find in old Valyria? But he had to send him there, if only because he couldn't afford to go himself. Maybe he'd get lucky, and the arrogant oaf would die trying to find Brightroar. That would be the most ideal outcome. Which left the matter of the Darklins. So how to do it then? How best to deal with them? Dragonfire wasn't an option yet, and wouldn't be for at least another year or so. Kurama could carry him into battle, but the others could not. And Issabu, Titanic though he might be, was limited to the sea. He wasn't entirely certain his dear old friend could survive outside of it. Duskendale, meanwhile, was on a bloody hill. But didn't they have a port? Most of their supplies came from sea as much as the land, leaving them vulnerable on the Blackwater. No. He decided against it a moment later. Using Issabu in such a manner would mean revealing him to the world at large again, and what might once be considered a myth or legend by Stark sailors and Lannister bannermen would not be so easily dismissed a second time. His presence would lead to questions, inquiries he wasn't prepared to answer. That said, only a fool would walk into an enemy stronghold alone without taking certain precautions. Maybe he should arrange to meet on neutral ground. And then, when the time came, Eris. Burn them all! He flinched, remembering the vision from the weirwood tree in the stone garden. That memory was the catalyst. The gap in the wall he'd worked so hard to build between him and what he'd seen. He grit his teeth against it, but it wasn't enough. More came pouring through, inundating him in a flood. He caught himself on a wall, fingers biting into the stone. Not now. He didn't have time for this. Here's to the Mad King, second of his name, protector of the 7 kingdoms. And the sword I shoved through his back. You are no knight. You have forsaken every vow you ever took. So many vows, they make you swear and swear. I'll kill every Targaryen I get my hands on. Death to the dragons! He killed my son. Brother? A familiar voice freed him from the visions. Naruto blinked and looked up, belatedly realizing where he was. Somehow his feet had carried him to Rhaella's chambers. Jaime stood where often did these days, guarding her door. With the Kingsguard in such scarce supply these days, and Barristan off nursing his wounds, his position was more important than ever. Then again, if he was standing here, that probably meant Rhaella was within. He really ought to speak with her before tomorrow. His elder brother laid a hand on his shoulder, face wrought with concern. Are you all right? You look tired. Tired? That was one word for it, but no, this was his burden to bear. The future wasn't set in stone, he knew that. As did Elia Martell. He couldn't let what he'd seen come to pass. Jaime wouldn't become the Kingslayer, so he swore. He shook his head and turned a wary glance toward the door. Fine. You've good timing, Jaime granted him a wry grin. Our dear prince was just in. Naruto bristled for all the wrong reasons, finding himself instinctively protective. Oh, what did he do? More like what didn't he do? A chuckle was his reward. He came storming over with a huff. I expect he wished to be comforted after father gave him a tongue-lashing. That, or see his mother's dragon. His grin grew yet another inch as he looked on. He certainly succeeded in the latter, at least. Chome bit him, didn't he? Jamie's grin proved downright contagious. Little bastard drew blood. Rhaegar ran for a maester. Ha! The thought lifted Naruto's spirits a bit. He turned a longing look toward the door. Is the queen? Jamie craned his neck toward the wooden frame as well. With the silencing seals still firmly affixed to the walls and ceiling, one couldn't hear a thing coming from without, but the same could not be said of those within. He'd made certain of that. It was an intentional design flaw on his choice. As such, he was certain Rayla heard him. Sure enough, he felt the floor shake against a heavy thump as someone dragged or threw something across the room. Or threw something. Jamie grimaced. She's not best pleased with you at the moment, Nate. No need to remind him. The memory burned in the back of his mind like a hot iron poker. Naruto scratched the back of his head, resisting the urge to sigh. Yeah, he'd brought that on himself by arguing with her in front of the council, like that. But it was the only way. He had to do this. I've come to apologize. He pitched his voice to Carrie, knowing Rhaella would hear him through the seals. Another thump shook the floor, this one more frenzied than the last. What in the seven hells was she doing in there? Jamie quirked a brow. Have you now? It had best be a good one. She's in a proper state. As if he didn't know that already. This was a bad idea. The sun hadn't yet set. He might be seen. He dragged a hand down his face, closed his eyes, and sighed. Fuck. Jamie didn't chuckle, but he did glimpse the ghost of a smile on his brother's face. Cheeky bastard. Wait till he found himself a bride. And he would be finding him one just as soon as father found a way to get him out of that ridiculous white cloak. He'd find him the most wonderfully troublesome woman. See how he liked it? Naruto opened the door. A most unexpected sight awaited him. He blinked hard. Thrice now, for good measure. Rhaella awaited him as expected, as did Chome, carefully concealed in his cage. That wasn't the problem. The queen had chosen a blue nightgown this evening. It paired nicely with her violet eyes, which even now lit up at the sight of him, a streak of joy crossing her regal visage before she could compose herself. My lion Tilda! She sprang to her feet as he closed and locked the door behind him, instantly prying his hands away to take a hold of them in both her palms, drawing him toward the bed. He glanced toward its many pillows and almost let the queen have her way with him then and there, if only because she looked so deliriously delighted to see him. Ordinarily, he would have expected wine to be involved, but there wasn't so much as a single bottle anywhere in sight. Nor did her breath smell of spirits. She was beautifully, delightfully sober. Therein, like the rub, as it were. Something was amiss here. He simply couldn't say what. There was no way she would have forgotten their argument. It had been loud and vocal. They'd nearly said harsh words to one another, and would have if they weren't in public. Yet, despite that, she looked calm, disconcertingly so. There was none of that cold fire he'd glimpsed during their last council meeting. He expected to find her angry, skittish at the very least, looking like an angry dragon ready to bite, or perhaps burst into tears. Yes, he sensed a faint flutter of anxiety in her chest, but nothing at all like the great lurching terror she'd felt before. Ushering him down, she bid him to sit. The second he did, she sat beside him, took a hold of his face, and thumbed his lips to hers. Her mouth lingered on his for a long, pleasant moment before her hand replaced it, subtly denying him the chance to speak at first. You are forgiven, she declared magnanimously. I'm sorry I raised my voice at you. Same goes for me. He laughed as she kissed him again, taking a hold of her hands. Hey, slow down, there's no rush. I still have to leave in the morning, you know. No, she crooned darkly, looking at him with half-lidded eyes. I don't think you do. In fact, I believe you'll be much too tired to do any sort of leaving for quite some time. Neither this room nor King's Landing. He quirked a brow, bemused by her declaration but not fooled. You're good, but you're not that good. I was still able to walk after last time, remember? In hindsight, he really should have seen the trap she'd laid for him. Instead, he blundered right into it. One does not simply challenge a Targaryen woman. Rhaella's gaze danced with triumph. Whoever said I was alone, my lion? With a triumphant cry, Rhaella rounded away from him, squirmed out his grasp, seized the bedsheets and tore them free. Much to his surprise, there was someone lying beneath them. Not a stitch of clothing to her name, a large wine bottle clutched between her bountiful bosom in a vain attempt to preserve some small semblance of modesty. Her pale face was flushed, pale hair done up in a singular braid, eyes averted. Because, you see, Naruto found that recognized her. His eyes bulged in absolute disbelief. Nymeria? She managed a small, shy smile for him and waved. A girl says hello. Raella embraced him from behind, arms coiling around his chest. I believe this is checkmate, husband of mine. His throat went drier than dawn. Damn. Chapter 43. Long may they reign. Tilda, whispers and sheets. In hindsight, Naruto really should have seen the trap Raella laid for him. Instead, he blundered headlong into it like a fool. One does not simply challenge a Targaryen woman and expect to emerge unscathed from said challenge. Indeed, the queen's gaze danced with triumph. Whoever said I was alone, my lion? With a triumphant cry, she squirmed out his grasp, spun away from him, seized the bedsheets, and tore them free. Much to his surprise, there was someone lying beneath them. Not a stitch of clothing to her name, a large wine bottle clutched between her bountiful bosom in a vain attempt to preserve some small semblance of modesty. Her pale face was flushed, pale hair done up in a singular braid, eyes averted. Because, you see, Naruto found that recognized her. His eyes bulged in absolute disbelief. Nymeria? She managed a small, shy smile for him and waved. A girl says hello. Raella embraced him from behind, arms coiling around his chest. I believe this is checkmate, husband of mine. His throat went drier than dawn. Damn! Because that was undoubtedly his second-in-command in bed before him, utterly naked. In the low candlelight, she looked less like a killer and more like a woman who had never been offered softness without a price. Gulping once, he looked at her, then back at Raella, quietly incredulous. You brought her. I invited her, the queen crooned. There's a difference. Indeed there was, but he didn't want to be the one to say it aloud, lest he jump to conclusions. Nymeria's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Your Grace, in this room you shall call me Raella, the queen corrected her gently. Nymeria's eyes flicked up, surprised, then dropped again. Raella, she whispered instead, clutching the wine bottle between her breasts like a shield she'd never used. I am unworthy of this. Nonsense, dear girl. Quick as can be, Raella turned back to him. She reached up and traced his cheek, fingers trailing along the faint scars and the whisker marks that were both his life and legacy. Look how his eyes linger on you. See how he longs for you. Nymeria glanced his way, face reddening. For once in his life, Naruto wisely held his tongue and averted her gaze. He looked to a nearby candle flame instead and ran his hand over it instead, taking the heat and using the brief burst of pain to center himself. The fire centered his thoughts, if only for a moment. Using it, he took a deep breath for clarity. This is unexpected. Raella smiled fondly. Indeed, I am most magnanimous, am I not? Nymeria shifted, sudden and uncertain. This is where a girl should leave, she murmured, briefly reverting to her old speech patterns. A girl has no wish to be a burden. No, Raella interjected firmly. Stay. Nymeria froze. Raella crossed the small distance between them and touched Nymeria's wrist. The woman's skin was warm. Her pulse jumped under Raella's fingers. You have been at his side, Raella intoned softly, gently prying the wine bottle from her grasp. You have bled for him. She set it aside upon a nearby table, leaving her defenseless. You have borne his burdens beside him and carried what he could not carry. Do not pretend you have no right to his warmth. Nymeria's lips parted. For an instant, she looked like she might bolt. Then she looked away, shy as any girl. I don't... Raella clicked her tongue. You do. The younger woman squirmed. Naruto watched them both, something in his chest loosening. Are you sure? Nymeria's throat bobbed. She met Nathaniel's eyes at last. A girl is... sure enough, she whispered. Then, barely audible, if you want me. Of course he wanted her. He'd missed her all this time, their quiet talks, her constant presence, her hand in his, her body nestled against his on the beach, the quiet assurance that he could count on her to fight and die by his side when none could. He felt his expression soften. I do. Raella's smile was triumphant, tender and tormenting all at once. She took his hands in hers and brought him close. Then what are we waiting for? Naruto let her drag him along with a sigh. He wasn't blind. He knew why she was doing this, not just to comfort himself, but herself as well. Because she had been alone too long. Because she had taken her body as if it were crown property. Because she wanted something that was hers. He kissed her. It wasn't courtly kiss, nor a careful kiss. A hungry one, the kind that came from going without for far too long. Raella clutched at his cloak and pulled him closer, reveling in the solid heat of him. His hands settled at her waist, firm but gentle, knowing her nature. Nymeria turned away at first, as if modesty could still exist in this room, in this castle. Raella reached, breaking the kiss to catch her wrist again, warmly insistent. This time Nymeria did not pull away. Naruto spared one last look for his sworn sword. One last time, he said softly. Are you sure? Nymeria swallowed. Yes. Raella made a pleased noise and pivoted to face her fully. Let's not be shy then, shall we? Raella kissed Nymeria then, briefly, gently, and felt Nymeria's breath shudder into her. Nymeria's hands that had held knives and blood, trembled now as they touched her shoulders. Slowly at first, then with a touch of courage, she melted into the queen. Raella made a pleased noise and tilted her head for a better angle, let the assassin's hands rove where they willed. Steadily, she grew bolder until it was the queen herself who began to squirm and gasp at her touch. But only for a moment. Raella had never been one to tolerate teasing without giving as good as she got. Quick as can be, the queen pivoted with surprising grace, boldly pushing Nymeria back into him, trapping her between two of them. The assassin panicked, eyes flying wide as her instincts kicked in, yet there was no escape. Naruto took a hold of her hips, fingers tracing the scars there as he dipped low to kiss her neck, and that was it. She became so much putty in his grasp. Her neck craned back as her mouth sought his, even as Raella began kissing her stomach, lips a southward line from her navel. Nymeria gasped. Candlelight made a small world around the three of them. Outside this room were kings and guards and monsters. Inside there was only breath, heat, and the sound of three hearts beating as one. Naruto took a step back, only to find himself summarily ensnared by the wrist again. I believe, Raella murmured, voice threaded with mischief as she drew back up. This is checkmate, husband of mine. He shook his head and loosed a strangled laugh, one of equal parts disbelief and surrender. You and your games, Raella tugged him toward the bed. Once upon a time, that bed had been a hiding place, rarely used because hiding there felt like admitting defeat. Tonight, it was sanctuary. They moved together slowly at first, then with the inevitability of rivers finding the same sea. Hands lingers, mouths kissed and whispered reassurances. Nymeria's stiffness melted in small increments, each one earned, not taken as they coaxed little mules of pleasure from her. When the candle burned at its lowest, Raella removed the last of her robe, pulling them both down to the sheets. Naruto took a hold of her flank and lifted her, fingers digging into her rear as she settled into his lap. Nymeria joined her there, and together the two of them drew him down into their arms. Resistance was futile. He was lost. When the candle finally guttered out, the room fell into darkness. What happened afterwards belonged to the three of them, and them alone. Morning came grey, as if the sky had not yet decided whether it would grant mercy. Raella woke, tangled in warmth. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot the Red Keep, forgot Eris, forgot fear. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and sweat and the soft perfume her ladies used. The sheets were rumpled. Her body ached, but it was an ache that tasted of choice. Her choice. A cursory glance confirmed that Chome remained sound asleep in his basket. That, at least, had not changed. Everything else had. Nathaniel lay on his back, one arm above his head, the other tucked about her waist. Nymeria slept curled into her side, pale hair undone, face relaxed in a way Raella had never seen in daylight. When that surly girl she slept, she looked younger, almost innocent, further proof that no one truly was. Reality returned like a slap in the face. Raella sat up, drawing the sheet around her shoulders. The Red Keep did not forgive. Eris certainly wouldn't. To the hells with them. Nathaniel stirred, blinking sleep away. His blue eyes found her at once. Morning, he murmured, voice rough. Raella smiled faintly. Morning. He sat up, already alert, and began dressing with the efficiency of a man accustomed to leaving before dawn. Nymeria awoke as well, blinking groggily, then yanked the sheet up with a small noise when she realized how exposed she was. Her cheeks reddened. Nathaniel glanced at her and smiled, soft as a secret. You all right? Nymeria scowled out of instinct, but it lacked venom. A girl is fine, she muttered. Then, quieter, better than fine. Raella reached out and squeezed her hand. Nymeria held on tightly, as though afraid this moment's softness would be collected like a debt. Nathaniel drank water from a small pitcher, then paused, staring down at the ripples like the water held another world within. "What is it?" Raella asked. Nathaniel blinked. "Nothing," he said at first. Then he exhaled. "Not nothing. It's been getting stronger lately." Raella felt cold creep up her spine. "Stronger?" Nathaniel's gaze drifted to the shuttered window, towards where the sea lay beyond the city. "I've been feeling a pull lately," he said. "A pressure. Like waves in my chest. Not Eris, not Rhaegar. Something far away." Rhaella's mouth went dry. "Across the sea?" Nathaniel looked at her sharply. Surprise flickered. "Yes," he admitted at last. Nymeria's eyes narrowed. "Another of your kind?" she asked. Nathaniel nodded once. "That's what I suspect." Rhaella did not ask who the others were. Dragons. She knew enough that said word could not be so lightly uttered within these walls, even after the rebirth of Chome. And perhaps that ignorance was safer. Nathaniel caught Rhaella's hand and kissed her palm. "I have to go," he said. "Already?" Her heart ached at the painful reminder. She hissed at him. "If they find you—" "I know," he said. "They won't." Whiskered cheeks dimpled in a grin. "Where's the harm in a little risk?" "Foolish lion!" Rhaella's chest tightened with tenderness, even as she scoffed. "You risked me the moment you touched me. Life's all about risk." Nathaniel's expression warmed for a moment, then hardened as he swooped in for another kiss, briefly leaving her breathless. When he finally pulled away, his eyes almost seemed to glow in the low light. "Don't worry. We're nearly there now. One way or another, this'll all be over soon." It sounded like a promise. His promise. A dangerous, wonderful promise. Nymeria watched him out the corner of her eyes. Bold words when two obstacles yet remain. Nathaniel's mouth tightened in a grin, smiled. "Eris screams in his dreams," he said. "He'll scream in the waking world too before the end." "And the prince?" Her beloved didn't answer. Rhaella shivered, and not entirely from cold. Nymeria dressed quickly, tying her braid back, pulling her cloak on. She looked at Rhaella as if unsure what she was allowed to feel. Silly girl. Rhaella kissed her cheek. "You are welcome here," she whispered. "Always." Nymeria's eyes shimmered, but she blinked it away. "A girl thanks you," she said hoarsely, and turned before she could say more. Rhaella rounded on Naruto, pressed her forehead to his, and delivered a quick peck his cheek. Then, unable to help herself, and because she wished to have the last word, she left a longer, lingering kiss upon his lips until it was he who was left breathless, not she. "Come back to me soon, my love." Taking his hand, she led him to an unmarked portion of the wall and pressed her hand to it. Stone parted at her touch, revealing a secret passage, one of many made by Maga. She'd seldom had use for such until now, but this she could at least grant him the peace of mind to come and go as he pleased. He arched a blonde brow at her. "Why didn't you tell me of this sooner?" "Because I did not wish to." She pulled him in and Nymeria into a warm embrace, then shooed them through. "Now go, quickly!" With her piece said, Naruto slipped through hidden entrance. Nymeria followed him, and together the duo slipped back and away into the hidden passages of Magus, soon lost from sight. Rhaella watched them go with a tender sigh. All too soon she was left standing alone in her bedroom once more. Her right hand drifted lower, pressing itself against her stomach. It was flat. Good. Please, not yet. Don't let me bring a child into this world while those monsters still inhabit it. Let my daughter be free of this madness and mayhem. Outside, the Red Keep gradually awoke in the light of day. Somewhere a gull screamed, and for a heartbeat it sounded like a dragon. In the corridor beyond her door, Sir Jaime Lannister stood at his post, pale in morning light, staring straight ahead. And if he just so happened to wear a smile, indeed if he chuckled under his breath, there was not a soul to hear. Tilda Eris still screamed in his dreams, but now those screams verged on the edge of despair. He was dying. He could feel it in his bones, feel himself wasting away more every day, feel his captors laughing at him. He could hear it all from his cell, the grind of wheels on stone, the shuffle of servants that tried not to look, the hushed pause that came whenever his temper rose in a sudden squall. The realm had not gone to war for him. The banners slept. Lords still dined, still hawked, still prayed in septs and godswoods and pretended that their king, their rightful ruler, had not been taken from them. Where was his wife? Where was his son? Where was everyone? Gone, 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 gone. In fevered dreams, he sat the Iron Throne as he had in better years, when his back was straight and his hair was bright and his laughter could fill a hall without turning the stomach. In the dream, the sword blades beneath him were not just cold iron, they were alive. They flexed, they creaked. They pressed up, eager as tongues. He tried to stand. He could not. His legs were dead things. No, worse, treacherous things betraying him as surely as any lord ever had. He could feel the weight of the throne pinning him, crushing him, holding him so the court could see what he truly was, a dragon with broken wings. The great doors of the hall swung open and salt wind flooded in. Eris smelled the sea in the heart of King's Landing, though the hall was stone and smoke and ancient sweat. He heard waves where there should have been only whispers. He heard, too, something larger than waves, an old groan deep as the world, like a beast turning in its sleep. Eris craned his neck. "Who dares?" he began, but the words stuck. His tongue felt thick. His throat felt filled with ash. A figure entered the room. Not a knight. There was no clink of mail, no spur on stone. The stranger wore black and red, a crimson sword hanging in his belt. A boy, no, a young man, golden hair, bright eyes, a dark cloak that ate torchlight. His face was wrong in the treacherous way dreams made faces wrong, familiar as a memory and also stranger than any foreign shore. 6 faint marks lay on his cheeks, 3 on either side, as if the world itself had tried to claw off his face and failed. He smiled. Eris felt his blood turn cold. "Not dead yet, are we?" the abomination said. Eris found his voice thin and cracked. "Lannister!" The boy's smile widened, and there was something in it that was not youth at all. It was the smile of a man who had watched too many people die and learned not to flinch. "Still alive, are we?" "I'm almost impressed." The torches along the hall guttered. Shadows pooled on the floor, long and thick as spilled ink. Eris thought he saw a fox in those shadows. Enormous, red as fresh blood, tails unfurling like banners. Then it was gone, leaving only darkness and that damned smile. "They sent you, didn't they?" Eris rasped, though he no longer knew who he meant. Tywin, perhaps? Varys? Rhaegar? Some traitor he must have missed. The fiends! "The traitors! They know I live and they cannot countenance it." The young man's gaze flickered. Exasperation maybe, or anger. It vanished as quickly as it came. "So says the mad dragon, jumping at shadows. Look below you." The throne creaked. Eris looked down and saw the chair's blades moving like reeds in a high wind. They curled. They reached. The Iron Throne had become a cage, and it tightened around him with greedy patience. He thrashed in it. He screamed again, wordless. Steel bit into his back. He felt blood, warm and bright, trickling down his spine. The boy lifted a hand, slow as a judge lifting sentence. "Wake," he commanded. Green flames blossomed from the torches, sudden and violent, as the hall became wildfire and laughter. Eris awoke with a yowl, back to cold stone, back to chains, back to reality and his broken body. He awoke with the scream still in his throat, tore open the sound like a wound. His heart hammered so hard he thought it would crack his ribs. Sweat soaked his nightshirt. The darkness pressed close, threatening to smother him where he lay. His legs were still dead. The waking world offered him little solace. He screamed in his cell, jumping at shadows, raving at ghosts. He saw his father and his mother, even his ancestors. They were all laughing at him. Eris sank against his chains with a wail, breathing hard. The dream clung like damp cloth. He could still smell salt. He could still hear waves. He clawed at his chains until his fingers bled, whitened. "I am the dragon," he raved into the dark. "I do not die. I cannot die." Outside his cell, Duskendale prepared for war. "Tilda, come the dawn," Lord Darklin's messenger rode out the gate, missive in hand. He brought Naruto's curt response unto his liege lord. It was the beginning of the end. But for whom, you ask? The Lannisters? Targaryens? Neither? Both? Time would tell. Chapter 44. We ride then, off to Duskendale, and whatever may come. Tilda, you know who? Dreaming and scheming, prelude to war. You came, Tilda. Cersei was delighted to see him in her dreams. The flying dive/tackle/hug may have been a rather large hint in that regard. Naruto caught his elder sister by waist, spun her around once for good measure, delighted in the pleased sound she made as her red dress flared outward, then drew her down into his arms. Perhaps that was a mistake on his part, because the moment her feet touched the ground, she threw her arms around his neck, promptly pressed her head into throat, and began nuzzling him like an angry lioness. "Wherever have you been?" she mumbled sullenly into his skin, fingers. "It's been ages." Well, well, well. She was actually happy to see him. Would wonders never cease? He chuckled ruefully, deciding to tease her. "Missed me, did you?" She kicked his shin. Ouch! Not too surprising that. It had been a while since he'd seen her after all. Of course she'd start pouting once she calmed down. Grinning through the pain, he pulled an arm from her waist, reached up, and ran his hand through her hair, his fingers acting as a crude comb of sorts to part her long locks. He remembered watching Joanna's mum do something similar once when he was younger. That had always calmed her down, hadn't it? Sure enough, Cersei went still. Ah, victory for Naruto! She'd calmed down for now. Exhaling in quiet relief, he cast a quick glance for their surroundings. Today's dream was something of an instinct void, a golden white haze due in no small part to the fact that his body was still very much moving in the waking world. It was a small miracle he'd been able to contact her at all, here in which the two of them existed alone, but not for long. He almost felt bad for her, if only because their encounter here would have to be a brief one. He'd taken a quick catnap in the saddle after seeing himself strapped into it, simply to see his dear sister in the first place. It was no mere feat easy to fall asleep atop a rapidly moving steed and slip him his dreams, let alone stay there. If not for Nymeria sitting in said saddle ahead of him and steering him, he wouldn't be able to do it at all. He was sure his legs would be howling at him by the time he reached Duskendale. Lyanna and Elia didn't yet understand his jutsu of dreamwalking, but they would in time. And besides, he'd been neglecting Cersei as of late. Now, if he could just... His sister's knee suddenly struck up at his groin like a viper, only deftly deflected by a quick twist of his hips. "All right, still angry? Calm down, will you? I was only teasing." Her fist thumped his chest, less heatedly perhaps, but firmly all the same, and still she refused to look at him. He tried to extricate himself from her, to no avail. She clung on like a limpet, forcing her away from him, even here in the dream might actually hurt her. It was only when he heard her hiccup that he realized just how upset she was. His grin faltered and his hand moved to the small of her back, stroking small circles against the fabric. "Sorry," he hummed. "That was rude of me. How have you been?" Her fingers bunched in the fabric of his shirt. "Lonely." "Ah, his fault then. Best do something about that." With a sigh, he pulled her closer. "Sorry." She mumbled something against him. "Fair." He cocked an ear. "What was that?" "I said it's unfair." Here at last she raised her gaze to glare up at him, green eyes gleaming with as of yet unshed tears. "I'm the eldest." Despite his very best efforts, a wry smile glanced the corner of Naruto's mouth. "You certainly are." She had been born a few minutes before Jaime, after all, a fact she'd never let them forget. "So how are you so calm while I'm such a mess?" "Because this is my second time around. Better not say that." He kissed her forehead instead. "I'm just better at hiding how you feel." "I'm not." Naruto rolled his eyes with a good-natured laugh. Clearly. He was still speaking when titled her head up and captured his lips with hers in a tentative kiss. He recoiled, heat shooting into back of his neck. "Cersei!" "What?" She looked up at him, suddenly wary. "I thought you were all right with it." He was, to an extent after talking to Raela, but he still wasn't used to her taking the initiative like this. "I am, you just surprised me." She tilted her head. "But you enjoyed it." It wasn't a question. Very much so. She was a beautiful woman. Also technically not his sister given his reincarnation. He wisely chose to avoid mentioning that his physical body was currently clinging to Nymeria's stomach for balance as he slept in the saddle. Cersei was beginning to understand that she couldn't have his heart entirely to herself, but that was no reason to provoke her. Not when she'd finally begun to improve. Time to make amends. With a wave of his hand, he rendered the vacant void of the dream around them into a land of rolling green hills and great trees. Planting his back against one, he sat down and, much to his amusement, Cersei followed, all too happy to lay her head to rest on his shoulder. "How are the dragons?" he asked instead, steering the conversation to safer waters. "Are they behaving?" She beamed. "Larger every day." "Terrapin adores them." How's the Queen? He sighed. Cersei had always been clever, and she loved her gossip. Well, he coughed into a fist. Quite well. She the picture of good health. Cersei leaned forward, eyes practically sparkling with intrigue. Have you slept with her yet? What was she like? Naruto nearly choked on his own spit. Cersei! What? She leaned back, feigning innocence. You told me to be honest. I'm honestly curious. Tossing her head, she tucked a stray strand of golden hair behind one ear and batted her long lashes at him. I simply wish to know her measure. Like Lyanna and Elia? She blinked. I haven't the foggiest idea what you mean. Somehow he suspected he'd be enduring similar questions from them soon. Rhaella was a fiery, feisty woman who'd given anyone hell if they stepped on her toes. No, don't say that. Do not say that. All right, fine. There was no point in lying to her. Not when he'd be involved with her in the future. Yes, we've been together. She has a dragon of her own now. I thought you should know. Cersei's smile thinned. Does she now? Naruto knew that look and sighed. Cersei, no. Cersei what? There it was again, that look of feigned innocence that didn't fool him for a moment. Why should I care about what little lizard she has? Matatabi will be bigger. He very much doubted that given Chaumet's status as the Seven-Tails, but he didn't tell her. But enough about her. His sister changed tact, surprising him as she took his hand in hers. I've been practicing with the sword again. My instructor says he's never seen a more capable student. That instructor was being paid by the Lannisters. Of course he'd say that. Still, her eyes said it all. Praise me. She really was too easy to read. He patted her head gently. Well done. Cersei preened and snuggled against him, nuzzling his neck. How's Jaime? Alive and well. He didn't miss the way she relaxed minutely against him. He misses you. Father will bring him home soon. Such faith she had. Silence ensued, and Naruto sighed into it. Robert really would be a good match for you. No. She flounced down, laying her head against his lap. I want you. He resisted the urge to sigh. Father won't approve? She flung up her hands. I can't help it. The heart wants what it wants. In many ways, Cersei Lannister had improved, both as a person and a duelist. She was a far cry from that spoiled, bitter, drunken monster she would have been in the future. The weirwood down in the stone garden had shown him as much. But she wasn't perfect. No one was. Forcing her into a marriage she didn't want would only end in disaster. In the end, she would have to choose her own path for herself. He couldn't choose for her. Cersei shifted against him suddenly, climbing into his lap completely. When you're the king, she whispered into his ear. You can do whatever you want. Whatever we want, she clarified. Doesn't that sound nice? It did, but their surroundings wavered. Blast. Seemed he was waking up. He drew her down against him. We need to talk. She pouted but didn't protest. You're leaving already? I am. Listen, Cersei, there's something I need you to do for me. Something only you can do. He wasn't manipulating her. Honesty had a power all its own. Cersei perked up, intrigue roused. What is it? They had a great deal to discuss. Tilda. Duskendale was in dire straits. Naruto knew at a glance, even from a distance. He'd studied his maps and his histories, but seeing, as they say, was believing. As a large port town off the coast of Blackwater Bay, it was located northeast of King's Landing and Rosby in the Crown Lands, bearing a rocky headland to the south and chalk cliffs to the north. Once upon a time, it had commanded great influence as an auxiliary port for King's Landing and is a crucial trade hub in the region. But those days, and heavy taxation, had long since waned its greatness. A long road ran beside the shore, between the sea and low limestone hills. Fishing villages dotted the road for miles, dead and empty. They'd been put to the torch, ransacked and looted. His stomach twisted at the sight. Nymeria wore a pinched expression and spurred their steed on ahead of the convoy. The harbour itself was likewise barren, as expected. What few ships they had must have been put to the torch or set out for safer waters long ago. Meanwhile, the castle overlooking the port was known as the Dun Fort for it, sported 4 large drum towers of dull stone, each standing like 4 fingers trying to grasp the sun. They'd be burned for it as well. Tywin had given him a stern lecture before they set out in that regard. Listen well, son. There are 3 rules one must always follow when laying siege to a castle. Investment, circumvention, and of course, let us not forget attrition. Time and isolation can ravage a man more than any blade. They will be desperate by now. You must not underestimate them. He wouldn't. Outside the town, its gates shut, he could see forces of the Lannister and the Crown were hard at work preparing a siege. Already they'd begun erecting a number of siege weapons to lay waste to Duskendale, including catapults, trebuchets, and even the battering ram, the latter of which was capped in a metal bearing carved in the shape of a dragon. Gaudy, he supposed, but effective, given they'd probably constructed these weapons on site rather than transport them. Already he could see work crews cutting down timber in preparation for what promised to be a long, grueling siege. Shame they didn't have anything like siege towers or Scorpion's ballistae. Those would have been useful here. Nothing else for it, then. It was time. Not just for him and Nymeria, but the mother of all gambles. Naruto tore himself out the saddle, alighted upon the ground and made for the gates. Here goes everything. Chapter 45. My son has always been underestimated, from the moment of his birth to this very instant. Even I thought he wouldn't amount to much at first. I admit this freely. And yet look at what he has done, all he has become, everything he has accomplished. Is it any wonder that it came to this? Tilda Tywin Lannister, besieged sieges were unpleasant. Ugly, nasty, downright dirty affairs lacking in honour and dignity alike. Indeed, such was why they were called sieges in the first place. Precisely why Naruto found them so utterly abhorrent. He knew the definition of the word, mind you. A siege was a form of persistent long-term attack characterized by blockade and bombardment, often used until the defenders are worn down and weakened by sheer attrition. Wearing one down. The thought brought a bittersweet smile to his face as he surveyed the gradual degradation of Duskendale. It was almost ironic, really. Speaking of sieges, he had been besieging the Targaryens for quite some time now, albeit with words and deeds. Grayscale rather than swords. Now that siege had nearly come to an end. And not only him, oh no, the entire Lannister family was to thank for bringing him to this pivotal moment. Thanks to them, he could finally bring an end to this, one way or another. Not just father and mother, though they'd certainly laid the foundation for him, but his aunt and uncles as well. One couldn't forget Jaime's part in this either, nor Tyrion for looking after the Biju dragons while he was away. Even Cersei had played her part by stringing Rhaegar along, dancing out of his grasp with half-truths and promises to consider his offer of marriage. He really ought to thank Ilya and Lyanna for dodging that dragon's dagger as well. Best make it up to them when he got the chance. Indeed, the Lions, he considered Lyanna and Elia family in all but name by now, had worn the dragon down over the years through sheer, bloody attrition. Clipped its wings, blinded one of its eyes, taken its tail, cracked its claws, dimmed its flame until it was a simpering shadow of its former self. Yet a wounded beast, especially a maddened one, was still dangerous, as were a band of desperate lords with nothing left to lose. In that regard, the siege of Duskendale promised to be a difficult one, if only because he was here. His very presence complicated matters beyond the ken of mortal men, much to his annoyance. Everywhere he went and wherever he walked, eyes followed him. Some viewed him with suspicion, others with awe. Those of the West showed surprising respect, while many a man of the Crown lands regarded him as though he were little more than a wild beast given human form. More than a few made a sign against evil when they saw them as he walked amidst the sea of tents. Here, once again, his deeds against the Greyjoys worked against him. Tall tales had a tendency to twist themselves when spoken from so many mouths. It couldn't be helped. Strife and superstition was bread and butter to these people. He had long since given up trying to enlighten them. He could do without their fear, but he didn't blame them for it either. After all, everyone feared what they couldn't understand. Nymeria had bristled at their blatant disrespect for the first few weeks of the siege. It had been a near thing to keep her from taking their fingers, and a fair bit of lovemaking in their tent, before she could so much as look at a messenger without wanting to carve them up. Right now, it looked like she was considering it as another servant, a young girl, scurried their way, message in hand. Evidently this one had been delivered via arrow. Duskendale didn't dare open her gates overlong for fear of being breached. He accepted the wooden shaft with its small missive, gave the poor child a single gold dragon for their trouble, then scowled as he unfurled the parchment and read its contents. More of the same, just as before. He tore the message apart and cast its contents into a nearby brazier used for warmth. They smouldered away into ash, as did his hopes of any easy siege. Closing his eyes for closure, he took a deep breath and exhaled harshly through his nose. Inhaled anew. Exhaled once more. Now, mustn't shoot the messenger. There are rules of warfare. Rules are to be obeyed, for the most part. When next he opened his eyes, he found the messenger dithering before him and his shadow, wringing her dirty hands. "Do you have a reply, my lord?" He considered her anew, and his heart wrenched. Gaunt little thing. Pale, too. Couldn't be older than 7. Looked like she hadn't seen a bath in years. Her hair was a long, tawny blonde, the old tunic and trousers she wore more patches than cloth, the latter in dire need of repair besides. Worse, her feet were bandaged with strips of dirty cloth, the latter acting as a crude pair of shoes. "Where are you, parents?" She timidly shrugged a shoulder and looked away. Nymeria clicked her tongue. "He asked you a question, girl." Brown eyes flitted her way. She looked tired. "Don't have none. I run messages." Naruto waved his second down and quirked a brow the messenger's way. "For us? Or the enemy?" Another shrug followed the first. "Enemy? Dunno nothing about that." "I run messages." Messages. His eyes widened. Might this be one of Varys' little birds, perhaps? He had no real way of knowing, and he doubted the little lass would tell him. That said, honor whom, he withdrew another golden dragon from his pouch and held it up for her to see. Sure enough, her gaze tracked the coin like a lion cub as he moved it to the left, then the right. From there, he took out his belt knife and scratched the back of it, carving a rough line over the beast there. "See this?" Her head bobbed up and down with great wide eyes the size of plates, and he resisted the urge to laugh, knowing it would spook her. "You can have this if you tell me your name." "Emily." Nymeria hid a smile behind her hand, clearly savouring his discomfort. Naruto resisted the urge to owe her at her for it. "Emily, eh? Odd name for a child." Still, beggars couldn't be choosers. He flicked his coin at the child. She caught it, fumbled for a moment, then curled a tiny fist around it protectively as though she were afraid he might take it from her. She'd no other place to put the money. The sight made his chest ache anew, and he knew exactly what Kurama would say, what he would do if he saw someone like this. Tywin was going to kill him. "All right," he jerked a thumb over his shoulder. "See that big red tent with the Lannister banner over there?" Much to his chagrin, her head tilted in confusion. He nearly cried out in aggravation before hastening to amend his statement for her sake. "The one with a lion on it." Another nod followed. "Go there right now and tell the guard Nate sent you. Show him the coin I just carved up. Ask for Tywin Lannister. He'll take care of the rest. If the guard gives you trouble beforehand, tell him I'll be back to check on you tonight, and if you're not in that tent, I'll cut his ears off. Also, I expect someone to give you a bath." Little Emily blinked up at him, her dirty face furrowed in a frown. "Why do I need a bath?" Nymeria's gaze seared into his back with unspoke questions. He ignored them all and leaned forward to pat the child's head, fingers tussling the tangled crow's nest of her hair. "Well, you'll have to be clean if you're going to be my squire." Emily's gaze got very big, finally realizing the sheer enormity of the gift she was being given. She babbled her thanks and bowed rapidly once, thrice. 5 fines now, hair flopping about like a mop. Too damn cute. He was going to outright make her his ward at this rate, or adopt her outright, if she kept doing that. He gave the girl a nudge instead. "Go on, get." Grace shot away in that direction like the very arrow she'd delivered. Nymeria watched her go with a wry look. "That was kind of you." Naruto grunted and stomped off in the opposite direction, forcing her to follow. She matched his stride to walk beside him, hands clasped behind her back, leaning forward just so. "You're good with children." He refused to look at her, knowing she'd see his blush. "Call it life experience." Her happy hum was heard regardless. "Is that what it is?" Heat speared up the back of Naruto's neck like wildfire. Nevertheless, he grunted and kept walking, angling for the edge of the siege line. As he drew closer, thoughts of kindness and mercy began to bleed away. Because he could see the siege engines, smell the smoke, see the enterprising merchants who are taking it upon themselves, it made him sick. Where was the joy in this? Where was the honor? What was even the point of taking the king captive when they knew this would be the results? Where was TGR's sense in it? He knew the answer. There was none. This was an act of madness and cruelty. And that was a former ninja saying that. Nymeria let him subsist on sour silence for all of several steps before more she spoke again. "I think I'd rather like to be a mother someday." "First person?" "From her!" That was rare. No, wait. What had she just said? I also think you'll make a wonderful father. Ugh! Naruto lost his train of thought and tripped over his own 2 feet, tumbled, then promptly toppled into a nearby cart of Cabbage's wheelbarrow with a yelp. The poor peasant pushing said cart shot him a baleful glare as he plunged into the produce, doubtless thinking him a thief. My cabbages! You little filcher! I'll have your irk! My lord, said peasant also blanched as he dragged his head out the produce. Must not kill. Nymeria laughed helplessly at the sight, clutching at her stomach while she giggled at his plight, the absolute traitor. Mustn't kill! Naruto waved the peasant on with an aggravated gesture and a growl besides. The man made a hasty escape, cart and all. He let him go, less concerned with the scene he had made than the humiliation he'd just caused himself. His thoughts were decidedly elsewhere. Naruto glanced back at her, only to find her watching him most fondly. She wiped a mirthful tear out the corner of her eye as she met his gaze evenly, her haunting gaze never once wavering, even when she reached out and took hold of his right hand within both of hers. After the evening they'd shared with Rayla, he very much doubted she'd ever flinch again. If anything, it only seemed to have made her bolder. How many children do you desire? Her fingers ran over his knuckles, tracing them even as her other palm cupped his from below, uncaring of who saw. Double irk. I rather think 5 is a fine number, don't you? Quadruple irk! That many? He hissed under his breath, equal parts bemused and baffled, unable to muster an even remotely rational response. But, of course, her fingers tightened tenderly around his. 1 for each of us at least, though I'll happily have more if you wish. Nymeria brushed her hip against his in a silent sign of solidarity, took one hand from his and ran it down her flat stomach enticingly. Would that please you? Desire burned through him, hot and heady. His back straightened, and he found himself longing to run his hands through her hair, across her face, down her hips, and hold her close. To drag her back into his tent, pin her against something solid and just forget about the world for a while. The desire to do so was almost overpowering, and he nearly found himself bewitched. It was only the knowledge that others might be watching that restrained him. She leaned in, whispering into his ear. I've been thinking of names lately. Rhaenyra for a girl and Demon for a boy. How do those strike you? Like lightning. Thankfully, Nymeria released his hand and let him off the hook with a playful look before he could ravage her then and there. Consequences be damned. From there, she turned her gaze back to Duskendale in the distance, not so subtly changing the subject. You could scale the walls if you wished, even breach them should you so desire. North sighed and reluctantly let desire slip away from him. Back to the matter at hand. He knew what she spoke of. He'd brought some supplies from Casterly Rock, chief among them the explosive arrows he'd used to devastating effect on the Night of Bones. Those were to be a last resort. Westeros wasn't ready for the secret of gunpowder just yet, even if he had discovered it by accident. He shuddered to think what they might do with something like electricity. Best keep that in-house for now, even if it cost Lannister lives. The thought saddened him somewhat less than it should, but he pressed on, considering the fortifications of the castle, both those above and below. This wouldn't be easy, no matter how much he wished otherwise. Sieges weren't fast, they weren't quick, and they certainly weren't fun. To whittle a castle down from the outside in was no meagre thing. Proper preparation was required. Thus, the first lesson one must learn was patience. Naruto hated waiting. Catapults, trebuchets, and even battering rams may weaken the castle, but words and negotiation would carry the day. For some reason or another, the Darklings wanted to treat with him and him alone, but to simply walk into their arms on the first day would have been the very height of foolishness. So he'd let them stew for the better part of a month, followed by 2, then 3, 4. Over time, their missives had grown more and more concerning, downright alarming, really. It wouldn't be long before they began threatening the king. Assuming the mad old lizard was even still alive, of course. Maybe he wasn't. That would certainly simplify things. Almost made him smile, really. Yes, sieges most assuredly were long and tiresome, but thankfully he'd recently discovered a way to cut down on that time with a bit of Shinoi ingenuity. Case in point, loose. At his command, a trio of nearby catapults each snapped upright in rapid succession with an audible twang and loosed their contents upon Duskendale. Alas, the first's aim was off, and the flung stones splashed harmlessly into the black water beyond, but even then the message was delivered. Close. The second had already been adjusted accordingly, and its heavy contents clipped the city's upper wall, smashing a hole in it. Closer. Third time's the charm, as the saying goes. The payload of the third and final tactical catapult whistled through the air with a keening whine. Yo, strike true! Where its kindred faltered, it struck true. Bingo. Naruto looked on in silent, somber satisfaction as his latest creations sailed across the sky and struck the northernmost tower of Duskendale's fort center mass and reduced it to rubble, bringing the great thing down with a ponderous groan. There were people in that tower, wicked and good alike, wretched curs who willingly worked against the realm and innocent folk that had taken no part in their lord's madness. He felt so many lives wink out, saw those tiny blue flames snuffed out like candles in a strong headwind, then closed his heart to them. Iron weights, when made heavy and large and sharp enough, pierced with more power than even steel. They were also easier to come by thanks to the many mines of the Westerlands. He'd taken to calling them dragon's teeth. Nymeria had approved of the moniker. Magnificent, aren't they? Unfortunately for him, so did a certain ditzy deluded dragon who insisted on making himself a nuisance. Must, not, kill. Naruto closed his eyes, kept facing forward, and resisted the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose, but only because that would give the game away. They certainly are. Rhaegar Targaryen stepped up beside him, and Nymeria, flanked as ever by Sir Barristan, the prince idly marvelling at the destruction he'd just witnessed like some child with a shiny new toy. Do you believe there will finally be a battle? Will they ride out to face us in the field, perhaps? How was it possible to hate someone so much for simply existing? Because make no mistake, he'd begun to genuinely hate the prince. No matter where he went, he just couldn't seem to escape him. This sweet summer prince who knew so little of war. First in Casterly Rock, then in King's Landing, and now all the way down in Duskendale. Why couldn't he just leave him alone? Now here he was acting like this was all some grand game. Did he even understand how many people perished just now? Did it occur to him that they should be mourned? No, of course not. Naruto fought down a grimace, exchanged a commiserating glance with Selmy, and swallowed a sigh. And really, a battle. Here? Now? In these conditions? This was no battle. There was no glory or honor to be had in the mud when you were killing good men whose only crime was being loyal to their lord. Perhaps. He settled for a frown instead. We've been besieging them for a while now. The prince sighed wistfully. I certainly hope so. Who knows what horrors father might have suffered at their hands? Naruto nearly laughed outright. It was only the knowledge of what would transpire should he do so that prevented him voicing his frustrations. Anything Eris suffered was well earned. Maybe if he stalled long enough, the old lizard would finally die. Barristan pursed his lips, clearly wrestling with himself for a moment before daring to give voice to his own inner thoughts. Your Grace, if I may? Naruto tensed. Rhaegar looked to him intrigued. Speak, my friend. 2 men might be able to slip past the enemy lines in the dead of night. Rhaegar perked up, boyishly delighted by the prospect. Are you suggesting the 2 of us mount a rescue mission? Not you and I, Your Grace. Barristan amended with a long, lingering look Naruto's way. I had another in mind. He's talking about me, isn't he? The urge to sigh was almost overwhelming. It seemed that beating he'd given Barristan back in King's Landing had an effect on him after all, albeit not entirely in the way he intended. Perhaps he'd impressed the concept of true honor upon the knight a tad too much. No good deed goes unpunished, it seemed. That said, he couldn't have the older knight running off and doing something heroic behind his back now, could he? It's worth considering. Nymeria shot Naruto an alarmed look, silent as the grave. He gestured behind his back for peace until she stilled. Only then did he speak further. As a last resort, he finished reluctantly adopting the political mien of Nathaniel Lannister once more, when in truth he wanted nothing more than to punch Selmy clean out. Better to exhaust all our options beforehand, just in case. That seemed to mollify Barristan somewhat at the cost of irritating Nymeria. Even as he nodded, she turned her head aside with a silent huff. Damn it! 1 step forward and 3 steps back. Glorious! Rhaegar exulted happily. Blind to the byplay, he clapped him on the back merrily. I knew I was right to leave this siege in your hands. You weren't. But he didn't say that. Couldn't, really. So he held his tongue, for now. Rhaegar was a fool. Noble in spirit, perhaps, but a fool nonetheless. He should know he used to be one. Naive, ignorant, well-intentioned, blind to ways of the world, right up to the last moment. A well-meaning fool was still a fool, no matter his intent. That he was even here in the first place further spoke to his own innate foolishness. A proper prince would have placed himself far from the field of battle, even taken advantage of their absence from King's Landing, solidified his hold on the Iron Throne. Yet he hadn't. Perhaps he was trying to make up for their disastrous duel. Regardless, it changed nothing. Or perhaps, no, best not think about that. But he just couldn't help himself now, could he? An awful sinking feeling welled up in the pit of Naruto's stomach as he considered the matter further. Rhaegar or Aerys, one of them was likely going to die here at Duskendale, weren't they? Perhaps both. Wouldn't that be convenient? How unfortunate it would be. Yes, such a travesty indeed to find the king dead in his cell, while his last living son perished on the field of battle. Rhaella would become the sole inheritor of the Iron Throne, the last dragon they would call her, and whomsoever she chose as her husband would become king. This was not the way he wanted to win. It made him feel sick to his stomach. Had Tywin already made preparations? Would it be a dagger in the dark or an arrow in the neck? Perhaps a poisoned goblet? They'd scarcely spoken to one another since setting up the siege, and he knew that was a deliberate act on father's part. They couldn't be seen together too often, else they might be accused of plotting something. Sieges bred suspicious minds like rats in a larder. Everyone knew there was little love lost between the lion and the dragon these days. The realm would do well to be rid of the Targaryens, excluding Nymeria and Rhaella, of course. My lords! A noisy rider clamoured their way on horseback, stopping just short of them, shattering his reverie. Another message from Duskendale, Rhaegar scoffed. Again? Haven't they learned? We shan't meet with them unless they swear to release my father. They've threatened to kill the king within the hour if Lord Nathaniel doesn't meet with them. Naruto swore a blue streak. Damn it! They'd called his bluff. It was bound to happen sooner or later. He could hardly say no with a horrified Rhaegar watching him now, could he? Refusing their messages was one thing, ignoring their pleas another. But if they actually killed the king in the next hour and he let it happen, everything would come undone. Not only would he never hear the end of it, but it may very well place the Lannister family in danger. An idea dawned. It wasn't his best, but it would do in a pinch. He looked back to the messenger. What were their exact demands? Am I to approach the castle alone? The messenger faltered. My lord did not say. Good, he could use that. Rounding on Rhaegar, he said the words he knew would damn him. I need a word with Barristan. The prince nodded, pale-faced at the prospect of his father's demise. Yes, of course. Whatever you need. Nymeria said nothing. She looked absolutely mutinous now. Because, you see, she knew what he was about to do. Fortune favoured the bold. Chapter 46. I've been looking forward to this. Tilda, at last we meet, Part 1, War Never Changed. He'd said that before, hadn't he? The time and places might be different, but the means and method? Never. In the end, victory was all that mattered, for it was the victors who wrote history, not the defeated. More often than not, the losing side was resigned to the annals of mockery and madness, doomed to bitter backbiting, followed shortly by disgrace if they were lucky, extinction if they weren't. Many a house had been wiped from the face of Westeros before, and many likely would again in the years to come. Whoever won here today would be the one who wrote that story. Naruto now, Nathaniel believed he knew how this story would end, at least in part. One way or another, a dragon would die in the coming days. If not today, then soon. The outcome was written in stone, if not by his hand, then Tywin's, or sage forbid, Rhaella. She wouldn't tolerate the return of her husband, not after all the horrors he'd inflicted upon her. Yes, the dragon's days were done. So why did he feel so uneasy? No one had any answers for him. And why should they? He stood before the gates of Duskendale, alone. Or so it seemed. Best not dwell on that. He'd give the game away, and then where would they be? Up a creek without a paddle. That's where. All his fault. No, he'd donned his war gear and made his preparations as best he could. Done all he could. From here it was up to, well, not fate. He'd never believed in that hogwash, even in his first life piss on that, as Robert would say, but rather Lady Luck herself. That was what it all came down to in the end. Luck. Would she smile upon him once more today? He'd no way of knowing. She had indeed been his lady as of late, but he knew better than to rely solely upon her alone. He'd stacked the deck, loaded the dice, tipped the scales, done everything he could to weigh things in his favour against the Darklings and their demands. Hopefully it would be enough. Cersei and the others wouldn't understand. Even the Queen, for all her charms, didn't truly comprehend the chaos a shinobi could cause when he set his mind to something. Nymeria was the only one he'd ever let see that side of him in combat. He had taken her and her alone to war, and it was in the chaos of war which she thrived, not negotiating with deranged Darklings, which was why he needed to leave her behind for now. She wasn't pleased, but she understood, and she knew her orders. She, too, had a part to play in this. Everyone did, whether they knew it or not. Barristan had sworn to scale the walls and save him if he wasn't back by dawn, and he'd allowed the noble knight to entertain such a fantasy, if only because it likely wouldn't happen. If he didn't return by dawn, Tywin would storm the castle, break down the gates, and put everyone within to the sword. It was tempting to bring Barristan along, if only to have another sword nearby, a witness in case things went awry. Tempting but dangerous. No, in the end, it had to heed him no matter what Tywin said. Better safe than sorry. He looked to the sky, noting the thick clouds above. One could see the sun above, if only just. Not stormy, but not sunny either. Suitable weather, he supposed. Had Cersei done as he'd asked? 4 months was quite a while to stretch out a siege, after all. Hopefully it was enough. A crossbow bolt suddenly whistled down from the parapet above, demanding his attention. Rolling his eyes, he casually caught the wooden missile in his right hand. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he held up his prize for the defenders to see and crushed it in his fist with an audible crunch. All too easy. He'd always had something of a love-hate relationships with crossbows. Sure, they were faster than arrows, and they packed a devastating punch that could punch through the weak points of armour. But they took entirely too long to reload. A good thing if you were facing a foolish enemy, but terrible if your allies were relying upon said crossbow. He could think of a few ways to improve the design. Thoughts for later. Someone from above hallooed at him. "Who approaches the Gate of Dusk?" Nathaniel Lannister, son of Tywin. He slowly opened his fist, deliberately dropped the debris to the ground for all to see as he glared up into the eyes of a startled archer. "Now open the damn gate before I break it down." Not with his fists alone, of course. Even he wasn't strong to punch thickened doors like these off by himself. But he let his legends speak for him. Fear did the rest. The man muttered under his breath and made a sign against evil, but shouted to his comrades nevertheless. Not a heartbeat later, the gates creaked open with a ponderous groan. Not by much, just enough to admit a single man, but that opening revealed a weakness of its own. There was a portcullis behind those great doors, as he'd feared there might be, but it wasn't yet in use. Good. That'd make things far easier. They were a pain to keep open. Naruto stalked inside, one hand on Red Rain's hilt, a forced swagger in his step one he didn't quite feel, and drank in his surroundings. The town itself spread out around the harbour with cobbled streets, but none dared to tread them in the midst of such a siege. He glanced about, idly noting the south of the town and the rocky headland sheltering the harbour from the storms of the narrow sea. North of it rose chalk cliffs, and before them he spied squat stone houses and buildings of wood, through the windows of which he glimpsed the beady eyes of peasants watching him. Duskendalers were often a dour sort, but it seemed even they feared him. Would that he could have allayed those fears. Words were worthless here. He'd let his deeds speak for themselves. The clatter of hooves claimed his attention, and he turned to find 2 guards on horseback approaching him, banners in hand. Behind them, a small column of soldiers in full plate knights stamped forth, armed and armoured to the teeth. Yet they didn't ask for his sword. Curious. Maybe they knew there was no point in surrendering it. He could kill them barehanded. Even so, it would have been common courtesy to at least ask, and only a fool would willingly let them within. Just what was going on here? My Lord Lannister. The leader of the group clasped a fist to his armoured chest and granted him a nod, helm gleaming silver in the sunlight. "We've been expecting you. Lord Dennis awaits you at your leisure." Naruto craned his neck. "Does he now?" "Your message suggested otherwise." The nameless knight laughed jovially and gestured past his fellows with an air of, dare he say, camaraderie. No, surely he was imagining things. Shall we go? As he spoke, the castle door slammed shut behind them and was summarily barred once more. No turning back now, was there? The only way out was through, into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war. Tilda, the great work, began anew. Nymeria knelt naked in her tent and laid out her latest face atop a thin sheaf of silk. The visage was perfect. Of course it was. She'd made wholly certain it was long before they'd arrived at Duskendale. She simply hadn't expected to use it so soon. Still, she liked this business not, it didn't sit well with her. She did not enjoy slaughter, nor did she delight in darkness, despite what some might say. In truth, she would much rather be singing or dancing back in the Red Keep, learning more about her ancestry from Raella and the like. Among other things, she wasn't accustomed to being loved by another woman. It had felt rather nice, truly. Her cheeks warmed at the thought, and she mastered herself with a shake of the head. Killing was a necessary task for one such as she. She was the dagger in the dark, her lord's shadow, the instrument of his will. His words were her wisdom, and his heart hers. There was nothing in this world she would not give him. Her heart, her mind, her body, her very soul, all belonged to him from the moment he'd spared her life on that fateful day. From that moment her life was his, her existence intertwined with his own. She had stood by his side and watched as he sacrificed pieces of himself, dipped his hands into blood, waded into battle and emerged changed for it. She had done her best to bear his burdens and help him shoulder the great weight he carried. She, like his father, would do anything to see him rise and take his rightful place in the world, to be given what he had so rightfully earned, what he deserved. Taking a deep breath to steel herself, she seized the face, closed her eyes and donned it. As ever, it was a perfect fit, near seamless for one who knew her craft, and she'd been given years to hone it. An outcast, she might be among the house of black and white, but she was a skilled outcast still. There could be no turning back now. Her eyes opened. She rose. From there, she carefully donned her new clothes, secured a knife within her bodice, and set out. There could be no rest for the weary nor the wicked. She would sleep when the deed was done. That, or when she was dead, whichever came first. Tilda. Duskendale's interior left much to be desired. The castle interior itself wasn't much different than any other castle he'd been in, and like so many others, it paled in comparison to Casterly Rock and the Red Keep. He let his guard lead him past dour dust-coloured walls under sooty ceilings until at last he was brought to an inner chamber. There he found his prize. Lord Dennis himself was a weary-looking man with dark brows, darker hair and a wrestling black beard, old and haggard. He wore robes of black and gold, denoting the colours of his house over which he wore a plain red tabard as well. Lady Sarala of Mere, known as the Lace Serpent, was the wife of Lord Dennis Darklin, and she dressed to impress, wearing a gorgeous dress of thin violet silk that clung to her every inch. She smiled sumptuously and held out a hand to him. "Greetings, my lord." Naruto ignored it, as he did her. "Let's discuss your terms of surrender." He tilted his head and spoke directly to them instead, eschewing a greeting entirely. "You are going to surrender, I trust. You can't possibly hope to survive a siege." Husband and wife exchanged a long, lingering glance before the latter spoke. "Perhaps you would like to see the king." Naruto stilled. Tilda. Eris heard his cell door open. He looked up with a snarl. "Lannister pup." Nathaniel gazed back at him, hands clasped behind his back. Now, is that any way to speak to the man who holds your life in his hands?" The Mad King spat at him, unable to rise due to his lack of limbs. Nathaniel crouched before him and seized him by the beard. "I've been looking forward to his." Chapter 47. Did you think yourself clever? You have been played for a fool. We all have. I alone see it. There are such strings on you, Nathaniel Lannister, but you do not feel them. Eyes upon you, yet you do not see them. Voices whisper in your ear, and you are deaf to them. You think this be your grand victory, your masterstroke? And it may be, for a summer. Perhaps 2. Maybe 3, if the gods are kind, though they often aren't. But in the fullness of time, you will come to understand the truth as I have, and the depths of your foolishness. In your need, in your human greed. You have damned us all. Tilda Winds of Winter. At last we meet, Part 2, Something Was Amiss. Naruto bit back a grimace as he drummed the fingers of his right against the table, idly listening to the Lord Dennis Darklin prattle on and on without end. Each word grated on the rapidly fraying thread of his last nerve, threatening to snap it at any moment if he were aware of the words grating on his last nerve. Naturally, he had refused to meet the heiress the instant such an option was offered. It was elementary, really. When one came to the bargaining table, in a position of lower, they didn't immediately yield to the wounded party and do as they ask, lest they be perceived as weak. Agreeing to simply see the king as he was would be the height of foolishness. He'd seen their knights. For all he knew, they might have more waiting in the dungeon, ready to drag him into a cell. So instead, he took a seat at the Lord Darklin's table and demanded their terms of surrender. Surprisingly, they'd acquiesced to his every demand so far. Bread and salt and guests and all that, though he didn't entirely trust them not to break their word. He supposed it wouldn't matter if they did turn on him now. He was confident in his ability to fight his way out of Duskendale, and he'd already planted several surprises to facilitate said escape, if need be. They really shouldn't have let him touch their gate. No, his cocknerns lay elsewhere. Because you see, Lady Sarala wouldn't stop staring at him. Even now she was eyeing him across the table like he was some sort of juicy steak to devour, and, lady, he wasn't on the menu. Her husband was of no help whatsoever in that matter. She clearly had him wrapped around her finger, and despite the fact that he was the one doing the most of the talking, he was clearly deferring to her whenever she deigned to raise her voice. A dusky beauty she was, and of mere though she might be, he trusted her least of all. He suspected she'd earned the moniker of the Lace Serpent through less than pleasant means. Indeed, he immediately distrusted her, if only because he must. He had quite enough women troubles in his life without taking a man's wife. Besides, if one was talking about beauties kissed by the sun, Elia was far prettier and wittier, and more genuine than this scheming hag. He really ought do something nice for Elia and Lyanna soon. He hadn't been able to spend anywhere near enough time with them as he would have liked. But back to the matter at hand. He'd come prepared for bitter arguments, backbiting, maybe a bit of betrayal at the least. Instead, this was... he didn't know what it was. Nothing good, that much was certain. Moreover, the negotiations didn't make a lick of sense. Ever since he'd sat at this table, it felt like Lord Darklin and his wife they were doing their damnedest to distract and delay him, and if not that, lead him by the nose. He didn't like it. Not only were they trying to lead him round in circles, but they seemed to show no haste whatsoever, despite their previous demands for his most timely arrival. He knew Duskendale wanted freedom from the crushing taxes they'd been placed under, the better to gain a new charter and possible independence, which would slow, if now outright halt their economic decline. But this, if he didn't know better, he'd say they were delaying him. To what effect? They'd been the ones to demand his presence in the first place, hadn't they? Did they think to take him captive? No. They wouldn't have allowed him his sword then, and they certainly weren't treating him like a prisoner. Something wasn't adding up here. Were they afraid of him? Trying to placate him, perhaps? Possibly. He'd amassed something of a nasty reputation when it came to his enemies as of late. In the end, they were simply being far too ingratiating for his liking, so he decided to call their bluff, as it were. What in the seven hells are you doing? Denise Darklin flinched. There it was. Doing what, my lord? He didn't fail to notice the haggard man's stutter. That's what I'd like to know. Naruto steepled his fingers and laid his chin atop them to stare the bearded noble D. Kabuyuan. You offer me the king, then give me the runaround for the better part of an hour when I refuse to meet him immediately. Is this a game to you? A game, my lord? The man made to speak, but his wicked wife beat him to it, wearing a sultry smile besides. When one plays a Game of Thrones, one wins or one dies. Surely you of all people know this. Humming softly, she mimicked his pose, much to his irritation. I must admit, I didn't expect you'd make things so difficult for us. We could have spared everyone a great deal of unpleasantness, she gestured with one hand, and ended this matter months ago if you'd simply agreed to meet with us privately. Or did you perhaps need more time for your little scheme to settle in? The hackles on the back of Naruto's neck rose. Did they know? Could they? No, it shouldn't be possible. He ran a tight ship, and Tywin a tighter castle. News of the dragons couldn't have possibly slipped out. Insofar as the world knew, there was presently only a single living worm in the world, and that was Chome. No other. If the crown, or anyone knew of the Biju dragons housed under the stone garden, They would have been besieged by now, while only Kurama and Isabu could carry a rider. Granted, they might not know. This wicked woman could be speaking of any number of things, in which case he would give nothing away. Games! That was what it came down to the end, didn't it? Everyone wanted to play games, not just with him, but the realm. Such was why they called it a Game of Thrones. Everyone wanted the Iron Throne, be it a decrepit dragon, his idiotic son, or a scheming woman who thought she had the measure of him. Of course, his own family was little better, but at least they were somewhat principled about it. Meanwhile, this lace serpent thought she could sink her fangs into him, wholly unaware that he'd already been bitten by another. How he longed to drive a Rasengan through Sarala's smiling face. "Surrender," he said instead, "for the good of your people." The lace serpent surprised him with a laugh. "The people," she tutted, rolling her eyes. "What does it matter what the people think? The lion does not concern himself with the opinions of sheep, no." Throwing Tywin's words at him now, was she? How very droll. Spoken like one who does not understand the true responsibility of a ruler. The lion may indeed not care what the sheep bloody thought of him, but he had a responsibility to them nevertheless, just as any lord did those who lived under their banner. The lion took only what meat needed from the sheep to survive, for it was the sheep that kept him fed. The lion did not glut himself on the flock, he did not torment them, did not throw them into blind peril for his amusement. And what does our beloved ruler do, Sarala countered with a dangerous hum. The Mad King torments his subjects wherever he sees fit, inflict taxes on those who cannot afford them, burns those he dislikes. He has more enemies than allies these days. Few would miss him. Careful. Naruto thumped a fist against the table. And your brilliant plan was to kidnap him and do what? Hold him for ransom? How clever. If he had but listened to us from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary. Lord Darkland tried to interject. You are the master of coin now, are you not? Surely such matters as taxes fall under your purview. Lord Tywin will listen to you, of course. If we can but come to an arrangement, Sarala quelled him with a glance. Be silent, husband. The adults are talking. Naruto took note of their dynamic with silent dismay. Idiots. There would be no agreement, didn't they see that? They'd be lucky to walk away from this with their necks intact. Let us be calm. Sarala must have seen the glimmer of anger spark in his eyes, because she swiftly sought to steer the conversation towards safer waters. We wish only to aid House Lannister, my lord. Aid us? Try as he might, Naruto couldn't quite contain the bitter bark of laughter that leapt from his lips. And how, pray tell, did you intend to do that? By securing the king for you. The lace serpent was all smiles once more, trying to pour poison in his ear with her forked tongue. We have ever been allies of the true power behind the crown. Such was why we went to these lengths in the first place. The better to ease your rightful ascension to the Iron Throne. Naruto bit his tongue until he tasted blood. He swallowed it. Only then did he speak. I have no idea what you're talking about. Sarala batted her long eyelashes at him. Come now, let us not play coy at this late hour. It is the will of the gods. Your will. She gestured his way as though such had been her plan all along. He told us so. His eyes widened. He? Sarala bobbed her head in a nod. Yes, of course. Your dear friend was most clear in his instructions. Dear friend? His? Who in the seven hells was she talking about? Just what conspiracy had he stumbled upon here? Worse, he couldn't even afford to ask who he was for fear of giving himself away just yet. Should the Darklings realize the defiance of Duskendale genuinely wasn't his plan, that he'd never intended for it to transpire, they'd realize that they were deceived. The moment they understood that, the entire castle would turn against him, and he'd be forced to fight his way out. A fine song that might make, but it wouldn't get him the answers he sought. Someone was playing him for a fool here. He didn't know if it was the Darklings or someone else, but he liked it not. Not one bloody bit. Yes, of course, he said instead. I think I'd like to see the king now. Sarala was all smiles. But of course. Tilda. Eris heard his cell door open. He recognized the sound of those wretched rusty hinges all too well, and the approaching torchlight. As such, he looked up with a snarl, glaring at his visitor with all the venom he possessed. More of his captors come to torment him, no doubt. They fed him tainted food and sour water, just enough scraps to keep him alive. Imagine his surprise then, when the first thing he saw was blonde hair. Could it be? No, it was. His worst nightmare finally come to pass. His eyes bulged as he coughed wetly. Lannister! For it was indeed Nathaniel Lannister who gazed back at him, hands clasped behind his back, face serene. He looked every bit Tywin's son, how he hated him, in his armor, sword at his side. His eyes were cold, his smile thin. A lone knight accompanied him and was summarily dismissed with a glance like the chaff he was. Leave us. The man did so without a word, closing the cell door behind him, not even deigning to lock it before striding away. His heavy footfalls receded into the dark, leaving them alone. In his absence, Nathaniel pivoted, plucked something from the pouch at his belt, and pressed it into the nearest wall by the door. A piece of paper, a tag of some sort. It rippled into the stone and vanished, leaving him to wonder if he'd ever seen it at all. Was he imagining it? Imagining this? Was anything real? Was he? I've been looking forward to this. As he looked on, Lannister set his torch in a nearby sconce beside the wall, thereby freeing up his hand, casting flickering shadows of firelight into the gloom. The darkness played tricks on his eyes. For a moment, his so-called shadow seemed more man than beast, a towering terror with 9 tails. He blinked, and the vision failed him, leaving him gazing feebly at his latest tormentor. "There we are," his visitor mumbled lowly, the words for him and him alone. "That's much better. No one can hear us now, it's just you and me." At length, the boy who would not die turned to face him fully, wearing a more genial smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Greetings, Your Grace." He inclined his head in a curt nod. "It's so nice to finally meet you," Eris hissed like a snake. "Wretched lion! Wretched lion!" Tywin's favourite son threw his own words back at him, tutted and strode forward. Now, is that any way to speak to the man who holds your life in his hands?" "My life?" The Mad King spat at him, unable to rise due to his lack of limbs. "You've ruined my life!" "Have I?" Nathaniel continued to approach him at a languid pace. "How so?" "Lies and fobbles. It was him. His fault. All of it. Every bit. He was responsible for everything that had befallen him. He knew it, he just couldn't prove it. But he didn't have to prove anything. He was the king. Once he was free from this cell, he would see every living Lannister clapped in irons, dragged to the gallows, their bits torn out and their bodies burned. Yes! Burn them! Burn them all! Burn them in their homes, burn them in their beds, burn them all. Nathaniel crouched before him, hands on his knees, and said nothing. His silence unnerved Eris. What was he up to? Puffing up his chest, he wheezed at him. "Well, don't just stand there. Free me this instant. Do so, and I'll make your death quick." Nathaniel tilted his head, the fading light of the torch falling just shy of his eyes. "My death, is it? Now you're just being rude. Is that any way to treat your savior?" "Savior? Him?" That calm demeanor cracked what little restraint the monarch had left. "You'll die," Eris raved up at him, thrashing against his chains. "All of you! Every last one of you! I'll slaughter every single lion I can get my hands on, starting with your whore of a mother." He kept rambling without restraint, caring not for the silent spectre of death looming over him. "And that pretty Stark girl you favour, oh yes. My son has such plans for her." He didn't even know if that last bit was entirely true. He just wanted to hurt the man before him. And so he did. A sudden hand seized him by his wispy beard and yanked, dragging him into a bruising headbutt. He saw stars and tried to speak, only for a hand to cup his chin and force his jaw shut with such force that he felt his rotten molars crack in his jaw. He sought to scream, but the sound was muffled as that hand on his chin shifted, coming up to mute his mouth entirely. He'd done it now. Lad laid hands on him. His life was forfeit. Tywin's son would die. Die in so much pain. Blazing eyes met his, set in a face wrought with silent rage. "What is Rhaegar planning?" Eris cackled at him. "I'll never tell." "Because he didn't know." "I believe you." Something in his tone frightened him just then. Snarling through the fear, Eris sought to bite him through his glove and was summarily backhanded for it, sending teeth spraying across the floor. That much he hadn't expected, nor the pain that followed. Pain! No one had ever dared to strike him before, not even his father. "You cannot touch me," he slurred up at him, lisping the words through his bloody gums. "I am the king." Another backhand struck him, snapping his head to the right, followed by a third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Upon the 7th blow, the wretched lion finally paused to adjust his bloodied gloves and gaze down at him. Any man who must say, "I am the king," is no true king. I'll make sure you understand that before you die. Eris laughed wetly. Because you see, he understood the truth of it now, just how badly he'd been outplayed. The madness faded for a moment, and with it came clarity. He really was going to die here, wasn't he? But he still had one last spiteful card to play. An eerie calm settled over him. You blind, bloody fool! Tilda, you blind, bloody fool? Naruto paused, just short of striking the final blow. Eris looked up at him. Really looked at him. For a moment he thought he caught a glimmer of sanity in his wretched gaze. Did you think yourself clever? His lone eye gazed upon him with all the arrogance of his lineage. Yet there was something deeper in it now, something darker. You have been played for a fool. We all have. I alone see it. He scoffed, not believing him for a moment. Nonsense. Eris laughed wetly. Nonsense, is it? There are such strings on you, Nathaniel Lannister, but you do not feel them. Eyes upon you, yet you do not see them. Voices whisper in your ear, and you are deaf to them. You think this is your grand victory, your masterstroke, and it may be, for a summer. Perhaps 2, maybe 3, if the gods are kind, though they often aren't. In the fullness of time, you will come to understand the truth as I have, and the depths of your foolishness. He kept laughing, mocking him, even as his voice descended into laboring coughs. In your need, in your human greed, you have damned us all. The words stung more than he cared to admit. Enough! In fact, they pushed him right over the edge. Naruto stepped in and seized the laughing dragon's head in his hands without a second thought for the consequences. Chains clanked as he stretched them taut. Eris gurgled in surprise as he flailed against him in a struggle, perhaps in some last-ditch effort, maybe some final burst of madness now that his brief burst of sanity faded to the winds. Whatever it was, it availed him not. There was a drum banging in his head now, a harsh thud-thud-thud in his ears that left him deaf to all else. Do it. Take the crown. Kill him! Naruto, no. Nathaniel closed his eyes and took the plunge. Long live the king. He twisted his wrists, wrenching Ares' neck violently to the right. An awful crack filled the room. Ares Targaryen, second of his name, the Mad King, went limp in his arms. Naruto let him fall from his hands and collapsed to the floor. The monarch's good eye stared lifelessly into the stone, blankly unswerving. A brief rasp left his chapped lips, a sigh of release, then no more. The king was dead. Not a heartbeat later, the cell door slammed open behind him, as though someone had been waiting there. Perhaps that was the plan. Perhaps he hadn't been paying attention. Whatever the case, it didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. Naruto turned to face them, numb to it all. In short order, he found himself face to face with the nameless knight from before, the very same soul who had refused to remove his helm, yet hadn't been afraid of him. Nor was he now. The nameless knight took one look at him, looked to Ares' corpse sprawled out at his feet, and came to the obvious conclusion. You killed him. There was no way he could possibly explain this. Not, and be believed. Even in death, Ares still had the last laugh. Naruto held up a bloody glove, knowing what was about to happen, knowing he could still stop this. Or try to. He really could. But he was tired of this. Tired of these games and tricks and prophecies. Tired of everyone thinking him the fool, of believing that they owned him, that he owed them. Tired of skulking and hiding and planning around mad dragons and prophetic princes who thought they knew what was best for the realm. He was tired of it. He let history take its course. The nameless knight drew his sword with a flourish and damned Duskendale with a single shout. Murderer! Naruto turned to face, raised his hands, and let go of everything. Guilty as charged. There wouldn't be any witnesses if he killed everyone here now, would there? Gods, it was going to be the Greyjoys all over again, but so much worse. So be it. Let the trap be sprung. He'd walk right on through it. He snapped his fingers. Tilda. Down in the courtyard, the hidden explosive tags detonated brilliantly, right where he'd left them. In an instant, the gates of Duskendale exploded open in a rush of flame, blasted from their hinges. Dozens died in an instant. Still more were left shell-shocked by the sudden blast, while others were left reeling. Naturally, they assumed it was an enemy attack, that their walls had somehow been breached, that royal army was upon them. Looking back, it could not be said who struck the first blow, who gave the first shout, who charged first, nor who shed first blood. Regardless, any prospect of peace was shattered in that moment. The rest, as they say, was history. There was only war. Chapter 48, enough. I have endured. More than enough. Let the music play. Let the bodies hit the floor. Let chaos take the world. Tilde rip and tear until it is done. Long live the king hands ran red. So too did the walls and the floors. Even the ceiling wasn't spared the slaughter. Rivers of blood flowed free far as the eye could see, pouring over the fractured flagstones, seeping into the cracks wherever they could be found before flowing down into the ground. Always pouring down, 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 seeping into the very foundation itself. And the smell. Seven hells, the smell. It was everywhere. No escape. Not from the blood. Not from the dead. None of it. Naruto loathed the stench of spilled viscera, yet there could be no getting away from it now. It was on his blade, spattered across his chest, stinging his eyes, flooding his nose whenever he breathed. He tasted when he inhaled, spat it as he exhaled, that nasty copper and iron in his mouth, the bloody mist everywhere, the red haze over his vision as he tore through night after night, guard after guard. With each warrior he slew, it only grew worse. Another knight rushed him while he was distracted, hollering vengeance. Rolling his eyes, he diverted their sword to the right with a wrist, planted his feet and stabbed up into their breastplate, skewering them like a fish where they stood. From there, he lifted their still twitching form into the air and hoisted them high, brandishing their body like a bloody trophy for all to see. His onrushing adversaries, and there were many, flinched in the face of his casual brutality as he cast the corpse down. Some stood their ground and fought, others flesh. It didn't make a difference. They all died. It was to be expected, he supposed. He was, after all, killing a castle. Castles required a great many of people to maintain their otherwise insane upkeep, else they would fall into disrepair. Not just lords, but knights and guards, servants and rat-catchers and like, any one of whom might be potential accomplices in this sordid scheme that saw him forced to kill a king. And what choice did he have after hearing what Aerys said? The moment he got loose, the man would have gleefully declared war on House Lannister. They'd be wiped out. In his madness, his need, his greed, he would have thrown all the world into chaos. And for what? Spite? Because he and Tywin had a falling out? Insanity? In the end, the answer didn't matter so much as the means. He'd sown the wind, and now he reaped the whirlwind. Aerys had to die, so he did. Simple as. Did he feel bad about that? No. Should he? He'd just killed a king. If word got out, he'd be forever marked as a kingslayer, assuming he wasn't outright put to death for the crime. Bah! As if killing a mad dragon was a crime! He'd done the world a favour. No, if there was one regret he had, it was forgetting to tell Aerys about his lady wife. He should have dangled that tidbit before him before he broke his neck. It was the little things, you know. And Crossbow Bolt whistled past his cheek, and he chided himself for the near miss as he caught the bolt and flung it back, skewering the visage of an intrepid sniper that had thought to take him by surprise. Never should have answered that summons. At least then he could have feigned ignorance. As things stood, he had neither the time nor the patience to question everyone he came across, nor could he afford to. Every second he delayed was one the enemy gained. More time, in which they could further use this trap against him, and he paint him as an enemy of the realm. So he did what he did best. He killed them all. It was either that or tear out their tongues, which would have been worse, much worse. At least this way, they didn't suffer. Those he encountered died swiftly to a man. Warrior or wastrel, he did his level best to make their end painless. After all, it was rather difficult to feel pain with a sword through one's heart, a knife in your brain, or having a head chopped off. Whenever he found a fork in the winding paths of the castle, he whisked a shadow clone down it with ruthless dispatch and closed his ears to the subsequent screams that followed. The Darklings did this. Not him. He was simply the result of their folly. Theirs and whoever compelled them to this madness. Strange as it might sound, this was still kinder than seeing Duskendale sacked by the royal army. Valyrian's steel proved a sight better than a crazed soldier with his blood up. By comparison, his was ice cold. He felt no hate for these poor bastards, not even pity. They were simply ants to be crushed. No, not even that. Obstacles to be removed, more like. What could the realm call him after this? The Doom? The Destroyer? The Death of Duskendale? Some other ghastly nickname he'd have to spend the rest of his life with, no doubt. A screaming soldier rushed him from a hidden side passage, spear in hand. Good choice in weapon, somewhat less so in tactics. Don't scream when you attack, idiot! As such, he had ample warning and, more importantly, time to seize the slender shaft, snap it in half and reverse it backward into then through the grunt's eye. A quick death. Simple, if not necessarily clean. He was gone before the boy's body hit the floor. Yet more blood. Rounding the bend, he came face to chest with an angry axe wielder clad in full Duskende plate, proudly displaying the colours of his house. Powerful to be sure, but unwieldy. Also pathetic. Anyone could swing an axe if they were strong enough, but it was a poor choice for indoors combat. Once he sidestepped its armoured owner's inital swing, the heavy edge slammed down into the stony floor where it remained forevermore. Its owner never had a chance to extricate it, because he simply didn't give him one. Red rain rendered those corded wrists a pair of bloody stumps and kept going, carving upward into the bearded bastard's face. Beard and bone slid sideways as the big fella toppled like a tree. On to the next. He was nearly at the Lord's quarters now. Bounding over the brute's body, he next encountered a squad of stern-faced archers. Their bowstrings were drawn tight, arrows ready to... Someone behind them shouted exactly what he was thinking, the words emerging as a command, "Loose!" Arrows skittered harmlessly off his armoured chest, most failing to find purchase in the seams near the joints. He deliberately twisted just so, and let one lodge itself in the meat of his shoulder, then left it there as proof he'd been attacked, further establishing his alibi. He'd need one once this was done. He snapped it off near the base and surged forward, all the while despairing of their so-called tactics. Idiots! You weren't supposed to announce your attacks. Certainly not when your entire garrison was being slaughtered by one man. Only the path and the blade in his hand. The result wasn't pretty, but it was effective. He smashed them apart, stomped out their heads to make sure they were dead, and moved on. So it went. He cleared the castle room by room, quarters by quarters, sparing none. He wasn't sure how much time passed. It didn't matter. Nothing did. Only the path and the blade in his hand. He fought on through the screaming castle, setting fires as he went, burning tapestries and tabards alike, sowing chaos in his wake. Let chaos take the world for all he cared. Duskendale wouldn't live to see another sunrise. Finally, he reached his destination, or rather he recognized the red door he'd originally come through. Narrow corridor. Bad place to fight. More guards awaited him than before. These were likely the last, judging by their ragtag appearance and sparse numbers. They had erected a crude barricade of sorts at the end of the hall, back from the way whence he had tongue, trying to stop him. It would not. Nothing could stop this now. His path was set, had been from the moment he murdered the Mad King. The instance he took his faith into his own hands is just things. What were a few lives compared to a crown? Really, he wasn't surprised that they'd barricade the door, only that they'd taken too long to do so in the first place. The fact that they had likely meant Lord Darklyn and his wife were hiding in there, else they wouldn't have bothered. They had to go. He was no longer certain what part they had to play in all this, but it had been their message that brought him here, their trap that they'd sprung, and their meddling that made him a kingslayer. Death it was. A villain would have cackled. He almost apologized before he caught himself, then did it anyway. Lay down your arms and I'll kill you quickly. He pointed Red Rain their way. That's the best I can promise you. I'm sorry. He heard shuffling footsteps behind him and spared an annoyed glance over his shoulder. Sure enough, he found several knights arrayed in heavy plate waiting for him, swords in hand, barring the way he'd come. He must have missed a room. Or perhaps they'd been lying in wait, preparing for this very much. Only of them had a shield, and he was cowering near the back. Surrender, Kingslayer! Their leader thrust a weapon of black steel at him. We have you surrounded. Kingslayer, eh? Better him than Jamie. No one would call him that after today. Because no one would be leaving this God's forsaken castle alive. And foolishly, they really did have him surrounded. It was by far their worst decision yet. Really, if it were him waging this war, he would have kept his distance and tried to pick an enemy like him off from afar. Worn him down through attrition. Trapped him, starved him, weakened him, then only moved in for the kill once victory was certain. Not before. Any conflict against a true shinobi was meant to be waged like a tactician, not through brute force. You couldn't overpower a shinobi, much less a former Jinchuriki. Life didn't work that way. They'd always sip away, assuming they didn't maul you first. You never, ever cornered a ninja. Surrender. And this enemy commander honestly thought he could contain him. Don't make me laugh. The men before him bristled, and belatedly, he realized he'd spoken aloud. Red rain gleamed in the low light as he adopted a loose stance, blade over his left eye, shading it from view. His heart hardened as he stared forward. The last scrap of empathy towards these men shriveled up and died. In that moment, he chose the next to die. All I am surrounded by is fear and dead men. He charged the barricade. When surrounded, always attack the weakest link first. Tywin taught him that. The enemy was surprised, of course, completely caught off guard, and well in their rights to be. No one expected a spoiled lordling to rush into the arms of death. And it was death. Just not for him. Steel flashed before his vision but never reached him. He simply didn't allow it. Red rain flashed forth like its namesake, deflecting a mad melee of attacks, and then he was among them. Iron and steel clashed, and it was the former that yielded, buckling beneath the blows he rained down. A panicked face flashed before him, brown eyes wide with fear, dark hair bloody, brows slick with sweat. A household guard, no doubt. He dimly recognized the colours of Duskendale. He didn't even know the poor bastard's name. He never would. Their stance was sloppy, their sword arm weak, their stance full of holes, and he took full advantage. Pulling one hand from the hilt of his sword, he punched upward into the poor bastard's gob, his gloved fist rendering the guard's chin and most of his face a fine red mist. Even as the crimson cadaver fell, he caught the corpse by its uniform and shoved them into another guard, tripping them up, reversed course, and stabbed backward to skewer another. They were still falling when he kicked forward, kneeing a fourth in the groin. They doubled over, and he stabbed down with red rain, puncturing his skull. Vaulting over his back, he landed on his feet and cut another's throat, only for someone to grab at his sword arm in the offing. He tore the limb free and punched out their teeth in recompense for their temerity. White and red sprayed out in every direction. One of the tumbling molars grazed his cheek and cut it before wedging itself in the wall. They kept coming, so he kept swinging. Everything began to blur together as he fought on, weaving into a tattered tapestry of violence. He ripped his belt knife free with his offhand, pivoted, cut a bugger's belly open, cut out the legs of another, slashed up into the chest of yet another, snarled when someone struck the knife from his hand now, and smashed his face open against the wall instead. On and on it went, a senseless slurry of savagery and slaughter. He saw the fear in their eyes, the panic, the realization that they were all going to die here. He tried to close his heart to it. He really, truly tried. Kill the Kingslayer! Even as he sought to focus, one of knights from the opposite end of the corridor crashed into him, pinning him to the wall. A glancing blow struck his back and slid off his armor near where he'd let the arrow hit him. He grunted, more in anger than pain, shunted it aside, braved his blade with both hands, and twisted to cut him down. The rest were upon him then, but much like their comrade, they were hampered by the hall as well. The narrow confines made it difficult for them to build up for their infamous great swings and strike him down. Without that strength, they were walking dolls in full plate. He had no such limitation. Red ran bit through stone and steel alike in stern swings, spraying sparks as it slashed into metal and the flesh beneath. He carved through them like a cake. Armor and shields meant nothing in the face of his wrath. Nothing cut like Valyrian steel. Almost before he knew it, he ran out of men to kill. All too soon he was left standing alone once more, looming amidst rivers of blood. Chest heaving, he shook his head, gagged at the smell, and ran a bloody hand through his hair. Sir Dustin. A familiar female voice called from the door. Is it done? Is he dead? Ah, there it was. He'd almost forgotten the anger. That treacherous bitch. Rearing back, Naruto drew himself up with a snarl and smashed through both the barricade and the door in a single go, breaking through to the inner room beyond. Sarala awaited him within, stumbling back in surprise. The lace serpent didn't have a chance to protest when she saw him. Her eyes widened in mute horror, then he was upon her, sword swinging. Her face split, as did her head, making a mess on the floor. He'd wanted to kill her the moment he laid eyes on her. It didn't satisfy him. None of this did. Sarala! He spied Lord Darklyn cowering behind the table like a craven, wailing for his life. A guard rushed him from the side and was summarily beheaded with a single backswing. Naruto ignored the dead man because he'd just noticed a maester nearby, an ancient balding fellow hunched by the window, clutching a raven in his arms. The wizened man regarded him in open dismay, but he too was denied the chance to speak. He whirled and flung red rain across the room, skewering him where he stood, burying the blade in his belly to drill him against the wall. The raven squawked indignantly and flopped to the floor in a heap of feather forgotten. Naruto lunged forward to seize the fowl before it could think to take flight. It looked up at him and cawed once, gazing intently back at him. For a moment there, he could have sworn it had 3 eyes. He blinked and it went back to having but 2. Hefting the bird, he eyed its leg. There was a message there, still attached. He unfurled it one hand, bloody fingers fumbling over the parchment. 2 words awaited him within. Well done. Well done! What did that even mean? More riddles! Furious, he cast the message aside and the bird with it. The former crumpled to the ground, the latter landed on a nearby chair and continued to watch him. He turned his back on the fowl and advanced towards his next target. Wait! Why are you doing this? Wagga! Denai's Darklin actually fared a bit better than his ill-fated household. If only because the bearded lord tripped over his own 2 feet in his haste to get away from him. It actually saved his life. Red Rain's killing stroke swept harmlessly by, shaving a few hairs from his head while leaving him otherwise unharmed. He landed hard on his hindquarters and crawled back like a drunken crab, desperately trying to distance himself from him, eyes bulging wide. The foul smell of urine reached Naruto's nose, nearly forcing a flinch from him. Disgusting. The fool had soiled himself. Red Rain swept under Darklin's chin, pricking his throat enough to draw blood. Who sent that message? The Lord of Duskendale gazed up at him, incredulous. Message? What jape is this? You know who? No, he didn't. Sweeping his sword aside, he grabbed him by the beard and yanked him into a headbutt. Tell me! Darklin raised his hands, not to attack, but in a pitiful attempt to defend his face. Varys! He croaked out. It was Lord Varys. 5 little words, and yet they hit like a hammer, striking down all Naruto knew. His grip on Darklin's beard slackened, allowing the limping lord to crawl away. He didn't get far before the blonde stalked after him. The man whimpered as he went, warding one hand before his face to save him off. He said it was your will, that the world would be well rid of Aerys and his ilk. With him gone, Duskendale could flourish. Everyone would get what they wanted. Varys? Of course it was Varys. Only the spider would truly go so far. Lord Darklin held out his hand. Please, your grace. I'm loyal. Your grace. As though he were already king. Sickening. No. He had to die. No witnesses. Naruto lopped the arm off. Lord Darklin shrieked like a stuck pig and recoiled, clutching his mangled stump of an elbow. Why? We were loyal. We were promised so much more. I know. Naruto stabbed down into the man's chest. Red Rain pierced his heart, nailing him to the floor. It was quick end, better than he deserved. Denai's Darklin died with a sputtering gasp, reaching for him. But I deserved more. Withdrawing his blade, the blonde strode over him with a weary sigh. Already he could hear the sounds of battle outside the castle. The attack had probably begun, which meant leaving through the main gate wasn't an option. Come to think of it, wouldn't it look suspicious if he walked out in his armor, just as he'd come in? Especially if he was covered in blood. How in the hells am I going to get out of this? The raven cawed at him, commanding his attention. For a moment he could have sworn it had 3 eyes again. Was he hallucinating? No, it didn't matter. He scowled beneath its eerie gaze regardless. What do you want? That ebony bird craned its head and gestured with its beak at the floor. He followed its gaze, glanced at the headless guardsman. His uniform was perfectly intact. An idea dawned. Might as well finish what I started. Atilda, Tywin watched Duskendale's army advance. If you could even call it such. It was an ungainly, disorderly rush. There was no rhyme or reason to it, only chaos. The sort of men spooked into motion by the prospect of their own impending doom. Fools? He knew well their cause, just as he knew well the outcome of this. Yes, they had anger and ferocity on their side, as all desperate men did, but they were ill-prepared to win this fight. It would be a messy affair, but battles often were. This Game of Thrones was still very much his to win, so long as he remained cautious. Meanwhile, he had no doubt Nathaniel had fulfilled his task to the letter. If Aerys wasn't already dead, he soon would be. A sudden breeze brushed his face cold as ice. Tywin was not a man who believed in signs. However, here at last, on the eve of his greatest triumphs, He committed himself a small, thin smile. Joanna would be pleased, as was he. Well done, son. How strange it was indeed to feel such paternal pride in the near minutes before dozens, if not hundreds of men were about die. Some of them were good men, loyal men. Others were tools, mere pawns to be used and cast aside. Dark deeds were best done by dark hands, yes, but better to have capable hands. Trusted hands. Speaking of trust, and Tywin didn't look away from the approaching army, didn't even spare Nymeria a glance as he spoke. Her disguise was most convincing. Do what must be done. Do not hesitate. Show no mercy. She walked away. Tilda. Take heart, my friends. Rhaegar drew himself up atop his steed, donned his helm and hastily drew his blade. We shall have battle after all. Barristan grasped his shoulder as he pleaded with him, to no avail. Your Grace, please. We must retreat. Retreat! Here? Now? On the eve of battle? No, his pride wouldn't allow it. He refused. You would have me flee? Rhaegar rounded on him, righteous in his rage. Nonsense. I shan't let good men and women die while I stand idly by. What kind of prince would I be? The Kingsguard pleaded with him still, face pale. One that lives. We are not prepared to face such an assault. The noble prince tutted in annoyance and tugged the reins from his grasp. I shall not hear of it. He spurred his horse forward toward the melee. Something hit him. His horse reared. Rhaegar looked down, stunned to find an arrow sprouting from his left shoulder. Another found his right shoulder. Yet another now. The next landed just shy of his neck. Oh, that was bad, wasn't it? But it couldn't end like this, surely. He was a prince. Another arrow struck home, hitting his horse in the throat. The beast shrieked and reared. Time slowed down. Dimly, Rhaegar became aware of Barristan shouting, riding toward him, but he couldn't see. The prince toppled backward and fell off his steed. Darkness swept in. Tilda. From the walls of Duskendale. Naruto lowered his bow. Long live the king.